Okay, we'll now can go into the meeting proper. We have apologies from Councillor Peake for lateness and Councillor Bazette for absence. I'll move from the chair that those apologies be accepted. Seconded, Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. I'll further move from the chair that the agenda be confirmed with the change of the withdrawal of item 21, which is the proposal for the new property governance arrangements, which we've discussed earlier. Seconded, Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 3, declaration of interest is for noting. Item 4, I'll move from the chair that the minutes of the meeting of the Dunedin City Council Representation Review Hearings and Deliberations held on 12th, 13th, 19th and 24th of August and the 1st of September, including the non-public part of the meeting, be confirmed as a correct record. Do I have a second to Councillor McTavish? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. I'll move further that the minutes of the meeting of the Dunedin City Council held on 1st of September 2015 be confirmed as a correct record. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. On to the minutes of committees. Economic Development Committee, Councillor Staines.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move that the minutes of the Economic Development Committee meeting held on the 7th of September 2015 be noted.
Second to Councillor Wiley. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 6, Finance Committee, Councillor Thompson.
I'll move that the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting held on the 7th of September 2015 be noted.
Second to Councillor Calvert. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 7, Audit and Risk Committee.
I think I was an apology at that meeting, so it might be better.
Okay, Councillor Calvert.
I move the resolutions under 7.1 and 7.2.
Second.
Seconded Councillor Staines. Any discussion? Put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. On to the minutes of the Community Boards, item 8, Waikouaiti Coast, Councillor Noon.
Thank you, Worship. I move that the minutes of the meeting of the Waikouaiti Coast Community Board held on the 12th of August 2015 be noted.
Second to Councillor Lord. Discussion by Councillor Vanders.
Is it possible to have all these minutes moved en masse as we did last time? Just saves a lot of time.
We certainly can. Would someone like to move them all?
On an obliging mood, Councillor Vandervis, so I'm more than happy to take your lead. But so I'll move all the minutes of the community boards, so item 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 and 13.
And you're seconding that, Councillor Vanders? Good. Is there any discussion on any of those? There is none. I'll put it. All those in favour of all those, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Looking through it. So we're on to, item 14, the online voting trial. And I would like to invite Steve Kilpatrick and Warwick Lamp from Council's election services provider, electionsnz.com, to come up here and they can open with some comments if you'd like, and I assume that you'll be there available to answer any questions. Good. Thank you. Would you like to lead off with the first instance?
Certainly. Your Worship, thank you, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to come today to speak to this item. As Council's elections provider, like Pam Jordan, I'm also an electoral officer. I'm an electoral officer for 25 councils, 5 DHBs, and in addition to that, we're the elections provider for further 16. So that makes 41 councils that we contract to in the council space. But in addition to that, we do lots of other elections in the public and private sector. Outside the council space, I'm known as a returning officer. Returning officer, electoral officer, probably makes me one of the most boring people on the planet. But when it comes to elections, boring is best, because as an electoral officer, returning officer, I deal in facts. I deal in numbers, black and white, deal in facts. I don't deal in hearsay, supposition, perception, fear-mongering and all those sorts of things. I deal in fact. And one of the most important parts of my job is risk mitigation. Risk management plans are what I deal in every day. It's core business to me is looking at risk, assessing risk, determining what the risks are and then mitigating against those. So what that means is, in this particular environment, I'm an expert on votes and voting patterns and voting systems. FPP, STV, postal voting, online voting. So I think it's appropriate in this environment to give you a little bit of history and background about online voting. Online voting is not new. It's been around since we started doing online voting in 2000. So in that case, it's mature technology. We have 15 years experience of dealing with how online voting works in the New Zealand environment, coupled with postal voting. During that time, we've carried out about 2,500 elections in New Zealand and Australia. To the point that today, the only elections that we do that are postal only are local government elections. Every other election we do has an online component, either online only or online and postal combined. Some of the clients that have used online voting in New Zealand in the last 15 years are the New Zealand Green Party for the party list in 2011-2014, the Labour Party for the Labour leadership vote in 2013-2014. We do constant elections for Fonterra every year, the Law Society, lawyers, doctors, medical council, teachers, teachers council, nurses organisation, chartered accountants, universities, power trusts, all sorts of organisations. So when it comes to online voting, the first major election for online voting in New Zealand was a public election for the Hatmana Charitable Trust in 2001, which was for an election of 155,000 people, did postal and online combined, off the parliamentary electoral roll. So the same electoral roll that we use for council elections. Since then, there's been other notable size elections. For example, the Well Energy Trust in Waikato uses the parliamentary electoral roll. Every 3 years, 130,000 electors. Those guys have used online voting all that time. So in that respect, it is mature technology. And the IT concerns and comments that some of which you heard today, you may have seen in the media, those comments to us are not new. We've heard all of that over the last 15 years. We deal with those issues all day. And as a risk manager, my job is to listen to those concerns, identify those risks, and then mitigate against them. When it comes to the cost of online voting, you'll see in your report that the cost says that it's approximately 165,000. That's Dunedin City's share of the cost of online voting for the other councils that we'll be using in New Zealand. 1.3 in your report lists the councils that have already said that they have put their hand up for online voting. 165k though is a gross figure before the costs of the cost sharing from the other organisations that may be involved in the election, Regional Council or the DHB. So the 165k is the maximum. Steve Kilpatrick with me here today. Steve is our MD and is experienced in online security and the infrastructure behind that. So he's in a position to answer questions that you may have about those sorts of things. But when it comes to dealing with voting and voting systems and how it integrates with online and postal voting, then I can handle those questions. Be happy to take any.
Would you like to say a few words?
Good afternoon, everyone, and it's good to be back here. I actually started my career in this building 37 years ago as a trainee programmer with the DCC. So it brings back a few memories. Look, I just want to follow on a little bit from what one of your previous speakers talked about, and to add to what Warwick has said. After the 2013 elections, there was a lot of discussion about online voting and what it may or may not achieve and how it might be implemented. And the government listened to those concerns and set about forming a committee called the Online Voting Electoral Working Party. And as someone said, that was in 2013, and this is the report that came out of that. They studied, there are 13 international online elections that they had to look into in depth, and they came up with the challenges that each one of those had, the results, the pluses and the minuses. They looked into everything. When they concluded that report, the committee found, because their brief was to figure out, is online voting feasible in New Zealand? And they reported back to the government and said that not only is online voting feasible, we've discovered a whole bunch of benefits, so it is actually highly desirable. Out of that process, the government, the DIA, took it a bit further and came up with requirements documentation with a whole bunch of requirements that we had to adhere to, which we have been working with Deloitte as our security advisor for over a year now. And that is to make sure that we adhere to these government set standards. One of those standards is a thing called the New Zealand Information Security Manual. That thing is actually 555 pages long. So it's a big document, it's a very thorough document. And out of that came 817 control points that we have to adhere to. If we can't convince the government's chief information officer that we can adhere to those, we don't get the green tick. So this doesn't go ahead. So my company has to comply with those 817 points from that one document, but there's a whole lot more. But that's just one of those documents. So to say the standard is being set very high would be an understatement. It is being set extremely high. And it's being based on these experiences overseas, plus our own experience domestically and in Australia. So we're going into this, as Warwick has said, looking at the risk, mitigating it as much as absolutely possible, just like we do with postal voting. Postal voting still has its risk, but we mitigate that to a minimum, as we will with online voting. So I just want you to understand the sort of work that goes into that. And those reports included IT industry leaders, as well as other representatives from local government and community groups. And the IT leaders, and I understand that there's a lot of media around and a lot of interested IT people have put their hand up to have comment, which is great. But bear in mind, people such as the CEO of the Professional IT Association in New Zealand was part of that workshop, as too was the CEO of Internet New Zealand. So these are leaders in the industry, and they reach out to other experts. Now, sure, not every expert has been consulted. That would be impossible and impractical. But a lot of experts have been consulted on this and fed into the government report. So I just want to give you a bit of a background into how that process worked. I'm happy to take any questions about any of those other elections that have been raised.
Questions, Councillor Calvert?
In the Let's Deal in Real Facts, would we be paying you the money between whatever it is and 165,000 to do this online voting?
Sorry, who will you be paying the money to? Is that
Yes.
the question? That's through a contract to
Is it you?
elections.com. Yes,
You?
it is.
Yeah, so the only report we're getting to council about this is from somebody who will be the beneficiaries of our money if we make this choice.
Well, we hope
And,
that
and
you
that's what you're speaking to, is your bid for a job to work for us.
we are hoping to give you some background into what is in front of you, yes. Is that your question?
Well, what's in front of us is just that we have a choice to either do it or not do it, and the only people who are in front of us to talk to it appear to be the people who are our proposed contractors to do the work.
No, I think you're mistaken. The report is from Pam. As our electoral officer.
Yes, the report though says make a choice, and these gentlemen here are the only people come to provide background to this report, or am I confused about that?
So they're here to explain to you how the process would work, and also because they, not Pam, are capable of talking about any internet security issues that we knew would be raised today.
I think Councillor Calvert's point is quite important, and that is that there ought to be some form of declaration of conflict of interest around because I'm not criticising the conflict of interest, I'm simply saying there is a conflict of interest between the commercial advantage of us making a decision in favour of online voting and the advice of the people. I'm not criticising you for giving the advice or criticising the advice, simply saying we need to be aware of that. I think the point that Councillor Calvert raises is quite right.
I take it. Christy, could you come along to the mic, Christy? Thanks.
Councillors, if I can respond to the issue about whether a declaration of conflict of interest is required. In this case, my advice is that it is not necessary because the advice is coming from council officers, and the gentlemen from Elections NZ are here to provide you with factual information. And therefore, the advice is coming through the council staff.
I think that's rather missing the point with respect. It's not the technicality of it. It's just that we are receiving advice from people who would benefit from us making a decision that advice might influence. And I think that, I'm not saying that's a reason why it shouldn't be given, but I think it is a reason why it needs to be clearly acknowledged.
I think what I would make the distinction is between giving us facts and giving us advice. And I think there's a distinction. And I think that in this case, what's been explained is that electionnz.com is our current provider, as I understand it, our current provider. They are here to provide the facts to back up the report from staff. So I don't see there's a conflict. They're already our election provider. Councillor Thompson, did you have another point? You had your hand up.
I did. I maintain quite separately that there's quite clearly a conflict, and that when you seek advice from somebody, regardless of whether that purports to be opinion or fact, if the people giving you that advice are going to be potentially the beneficiary of a decision in favour of one particular option, then that quite clearly should be, in my view, declared. I accept, well, I don't necessarily accept, but I take the point that there may not be a legal requirement. But anyway, it's been raised and everybody's clearly aware of it, so I'll ask my question. One of the concerns that has been raised is around the potential for a big problem, and you talk about the fact that you deal in risk all the time and you have to manage that. Some of us who were candidates for DHBs in 2004 will be aware that things can go spectacularly wrong. And in that case, there was a clear paper trail, the paper votes, and some of us waited 6 weeks for a result. So can you reassure me that if the voting did not have a paper trail, what is the mechanism that you have in place to reconstruct the voting intentions delivered electronically that I think we're at least required to confirm that from an audit perspective your reconstruction was right back in 2004?
Sure, I'm happy to address that. Of course, the problem in 2004 was because it was on paper in the first place. If it had been online, we wouldn't have had that problem. But In terms of assurance of the, it comes back to the risk management, the testing, everything that we do to make sure that we can minimise that risk as absolutely much as possible. And that's a very intensive period to go through, with a lot of people having input into that, specialists that we have on board, outside organisations, specialists in the area. So we certainly will minimise that risk as absolutely much as possible. And the absolutely worst case where an election had to be rerun, that would be the worst case scenario. Then there is insurance in place for that. Right now, actually, a postal election may have to be rerun. So that's just a normal piece of part of the process, really, when if a mayoral election gets corrupted in some way, a lot of votes get destroyed in a fire in a warehouse or in a truck or something like that, and it's deemed that the election has to be rerun. There is insurance in place for that right now.
And the second issue that I'd be interested in some comment on is, you've given a number of examples of elections that are currently held online. They are, to a large extent, not entirely, but to a large extent, they're kind of closed elections in the sense that they exist within an interest group. It could be a large interest group like Fonterra, I acknowledge that, but there is local body and national elections, almost by their definition, more likely, I would have thought, to encourage some idiot with the means and the intellect to stuff it up. In other words, to really work at just invalidating the election effectively as some kind of political process, or just for the hell of it. How do you protect against that?
We actually expect that.
Right.
We set forth in our planning expecting the worst. So there's all sorts of plans that you can put in place. Denial of service attack, there's mitigation plans against those, for instance. The intrusion, we have logs, we have comparisons against the postal component as well to make sure there's nothing to skew. One's not going in one direction to compare to the other. There's all sorts of things that we can put in place for that.
Thank you.
Councillor Vance.
In science, we generally have a maxim which requires us to go for the simplest solution possible, or the simplest theory that will give you a complete explanation of something. You've said regarding security that there are 817 control points that you need for security in your system. Doesn't this fly against the KISS principle, the idea that we should really have as simple a system as possible? Anything that has 817 control points can't be simple. Why do you have so much faith in something that is so complicated?
A lot of those control points actually apply to the voting repository anyway, so your postal votes end up in the same system. A great deal of those control points apply to both. So some are specific to the online component, but a lot apply to both.
Okay, I understand that, and I also understand there's a difference between electronic counting of votes and electronic delivery of them. And I don't have a problem with the delivery of them. I think, as one of the earlier speakers says, it's the actual counting that I become very nervous about. And I'd like to take you back to an email I got from Mr. Lamp in 2008 when I was inquiring about the STV calculator and the computing program that processed the iterations which personally took me from second in the running to fourth in the running on iteration 9 and blew me out of the water, which is why I took a particular interest, but never mind. I did take a particular interest, and I wanted to find out how the particular software was evolved for that STV calculation. And I quote from the response I got back from Mr. Lamp: He says, I've done some digging, and as I suspected, there was no one left at the DIA who was involved in this project and who knows anything about the detail of the calculator. This was a one-off project. All of those involved have moved on. He goes on to explain, which doesn't really explain it to me, that the calculator was developed by a software company in Wellington on contract to the DIA. Now, and that Pricewaterhouse have confirmed that it gives a consistent result. Now, that it gives a consistent result, I'm sure they're able to check. But if you have a calculator done by a couple of boffins, bought in on contract who have since moved on, and nobody actually knows what that calculator does, how can we have real confidence in a computer-compiled, counted election result?
Councillor Vandervis, can I just clarify? Is there a question about STV or about online voting?
It's a question about the use of computers to make the decision on what happens to the votes. And it's the computing side of it that I, as an electronics engineer, have a wee bit of issue with, because...
Well, let them answer the question.
But if I could just explain, every computer has essentially a chip in it, a large-scale integrated circuit, which nobody actually knows what goes on inside that thing. There are inputs and there are outputs, and there's probabilities of the outputs being the desired result, but they're a probability, they're not a certainty. So given that background, do you really have faith in computers being able to do the kind of work that you're talking about, especially when you've got that many control points to affect? And also, when you have your program brought together by a couple of boffins who've since moved on, how can you have faith that that program is really understood by the people operating it?
Sure. It's a fair question. At the end of the day, it comes back to risk ID assessment and mitigation. And in that particular case, it's a matter of setting up an auditable environment so that you can detect and measure the inputs and the outputs in that process. Now, as you've read from my email, things changed in DIA with regards to the STV calculator, but they had an auditable environment to do that and created two STV calculators, one which is in use today and one is a backup calculator. That was all part of the same contract at the time. That was then audited by PwC independently, who my understanding is also did manual tests of data sets through both calculators and manually using a calculator to 9 decimal places to be able to check that the inputs and the outputs were correct for that particular piece of software. So it comes back to having an auditable environment to be able to measure against, and once again we're confident in the things that Steve has talked about, that the same applies in this environment.
Thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, I'm a Fonterra supplier, so I've voted online before, and I've never until today, listening to Chris Burgess, our first speaker, considered that there was a possibility that my vote could have been, maybe I was voting a false screen or my vote was being hijacked. And can you give me, and you did talk about assurances, but can you absolutely categorically state that in the elections that you host that no one can get in? I mean, perhaps not no one, but is there a risk that if we adopt this trial, somebody could get in and hijack it and perhaps take my vote and accredit it to Councillor Vandervis, which would be a tragedy? No, it's all right. But can we have absolute assurance, or are you you say it's all about risk, but can we mitigate the risk down to almost nothing?
In short, yes. It is all about risk, you're right. But there are no guarantees in life, as there are with walking across the street and dodging a bus. There's no guarantees in the postal voting system.
That's right.
There are no guarantees in the online environment. So, can I that guarantee? No. But we can mitigate against.
I guess one of the big differences about the system that we provide, it's a one-time use PIN and password, as you've probably appreciated. And so once that PIN is consumed and the vote is cast, no one can intercept, even if they had cracked your code, they might well discover your PIN and your password. They still can't do anything with that. So they can't vote again. Some of the systems that have run into problems overseas allowed multiple voting, so the last vote counted. So when people were able to intercept traffic there and make sense of it, then other votes could be cast, but that's not what we do. In New Zealand, we have this wonderful thing called special voting for councils. You're probably all familiar with that. So if you didn't get your voting paper, or you weren't on the roll for whatever reason, we just moved into the district and it wasn't on the official roll, you can get a special vote. Likewise, if you believe your vote has been tampered with, you can get a special vote and that will override everything. So it's quite an empowering bit of legislation.
I guess that, like I say, until it had been put to me by Mr. Burgess, I'd never considered that the vote I was making could be hijacked. And if I voted online, I wouldn't necessarily suspect that it had been a false front and I was actually just my code in and someone else was then re-voting. So are you thinking that that's very...
That's akin to the postman intercepting your vote and changing your vote.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But I would say that the way I mark my voting paper, it's very unlikely that somebody else is going to be able to duplicate that.
Scribble it out and wait for Councillor Vanderplas.
Yeah, well, if that was to happen, surely it would be an invalid vote. You can't go scribbling out.
You can.
That's acceptable.
If the intention is clear, it stands. So that's paper voting for you.
Councillor Wiley.
I'm sure no one would change my vote to Councillor Vandervis, so I'll be okay.
You're already voting for it.
This is a trial, so why isn't this being offered free to us?
We don't offer postal voting free to you either.
No, that's a good point, but we are going to have to run two processes and we're going to have to continue with the postal voting process at the normal cost. At the cost in 2013 was $208,000, and now we're going to have to $165,000 on top of that, plus postage to send out the key. So I'm not going. So if you say roughly we're going to have to spend $185,000, $190,000 on top of the 208. Why isn't it? You know, I would have thought a trial. You would have wanted to make sure all the bugs are ironed out, and we would be going down that process.
The 165k includes the cost of sending out the postage for the second PIN, so there's no additional on top of the 165k max.
Okay, so the figures that I got from Pam Jordan last week said the postage outward and inward was $51,000 for the 2013 voting, and the voting packs were $157,700. So those will still be going out for 2016.
Sure.
So plus we'll have the $165,000 for the online voting, plus another, what, $25,000 to send out the keys. Is that correct?
No, sending out the keys is included in 165,000.
Okay, so 165,000 on top of the 208,000.
When it comes to cost savings, this is a really good point, and I'll expand on this a little bit. In this trial, of course, those that vote online won't be voting by post, so the postal cost of the vote coming back will be less, and therefore there won't be a vote processing cost for the piece of paper as well. So there will be some small savings in those costs for the first time. But going forward, 3 years down the track, 6 years down the track, assuming this all goes well and online voting becomes an integral part of council elections, there then is the opportunity much later to have a pre-registration type process where you can register that you want to receive an electronic vote and therefore do away with the need for sending out a postal pack. And once you get to that point and you're sending out voting credentials to people electronically, and postal pack doesn't go, so there's big cost savings in that respect. But that it isn't going to happen from day one. That's going to be much further down the track, as currently happens with lots of our private clients we do this for now.
But a trial was exactly that, a trial, was it not? So you're wanting to get through this next or 2016 election to have everything validated to see it's working 100%.
Well, those are DIA's words, that they want to have a trial to be able to see that and demonstrate that.
So I guess that goes back to why isn't DIA funding this?
Well, that's a question that we really can't answer, but the premise behind it is that the Minister of Local Government has said that councils, local government, are the ones who are asking for online voting, and their policy is that local government will pay for that at this point in time.
Okay. I guess we'll see at the voting time, but the other question I have for you is, have you had any discussion with ORC or the Health Board?
No, not personally, no.
Okay.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I've got a few questions, apologies. The first one is, you've done a lot of farmer groups, I think you do Silverfin Farms as well. And just testing some of the data that's in this report, has your experience shown an increased trend in election, people casting their vote under an online scheme as opposed to offline?
So your question is, has it increased participation?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Good question. The high-level answer is that online voting is not a silver bullet to increase participation. But our experience is, having done it in many elections, is that if it is coupled with a strong PR campaign or promotion around the use of online voting for the first time, we have seen a modest increase in participation. I'm not talking a 20 or 30% increase, but I'm talking 2, 5, 10% increase.
The question that Councillor Wiley asked about the costs and why we're bearing them, I get your answer there, but technology is meant to reduce costs generally. And it seems to me that the problem with this trial, the process has been fraught, that it's been designed by someone else other than Local Government New Zealand or ourselves, or yourselves really, and that if it were done better, there may actually have been a cheaper option.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so we're asked to trial a system that is almost all postal anyway, doesn't have the benefits of reducing costs, and requires another step, which is another post, something else, that you go online and then you have to have something posted out to you. Is that right?
That's right.
And that by its very nature may slow down the effectiveness of being online anyway.
Good.
Yeah, okay.
It is a reasonably common way to transition into the online voting, even for a private sector client, so they will often start with both and then end up with that emphasis moving towards online voting. But your point is valid.
Okay. When you deal with risk management, I mean, one of the risks I would almost say that you have to deal with now is, will New Zealand Post be offering a service that is reliable and efficient enough in 3 years' time, or 4 years' time anyway? So dealing with that, I'm surprised that the costs are so high, considering the benefits to you must be to transition into something more effective. Or are we going to have to bear all the costs? Because I don't know how you're going to deliver this otherwise.
Sorry, say that again?
Well, I mean, your risk is, and we've got an SOE already falling over amongst already. I mean, the New Zealand Post may not be offering a service to support this, your current processes anyway. How are you going to deal if New Zealand Post aren't going to be here?
I think that's a question for council.
Ah.
There is a legal obligation to run an election.
Okay.
How are you going to do it?
Okay. Okay. And the biggest issue I've got in doing this year, for me, is that we, as you've just heard, gone through a representation review, and I think we've changed our system quite dramatically, which, for me, I have some real concern about, and its effect, but I want those to be measurable effects. Now, you're statisticians of some sort, I presume, or some in your thing. My concern is, if we do this change as well as the representation review change, should it not change through another process that we have no control over, what the potential, we won't be able to measure which has had the effect. And would you, so the question is, would you encourage people undertaking other potentially dramatic changes to their voting system to change their method of voting at the same time in order to measure change?
I think in terms of the opportunity to consider online voting, this is probably the advice from Local Government New Zealand and the Department of Internal Affairs that this is possibly a one-time opportunity only. It may not exist. And those councils who are saying let's sit back and let everyone else take the risk, they may not get that chance. Simply because the political appetite to change by central government may not be there in 3 years' time.
They could do it with a referendum on a flag perhaps instead.
Councillor Tavish.
Thank you, Worship. I have a few questions. To begin with, there is in our papers a list of councils that have agreed to come on board. How many of those does your agency service?
Sure. The of those councils, of the 8, 6 of them are our councils. The interesting point about the councils that have put their hand up so far is that you've got Dunedin, Wellington, Pororua and Palmerston North, of course STV councils. And so I find it quite interesting that the councils that are showing interest in online voting are the councils that changed to STV first time round when they had the opportunity to.
And I guess of those, one of the things that the original DIA paper recommends is engagement with communities. Are you aware of the degree to which each of those councils, those 6 councils that you work with, the degree to which they have engaged with their communities around this issue? We obviously haven't really, we've just had it come through committee.
Yes and no. The one council that has done a lot of work in this space is Pororua City. They included in their LTP 2 years ago, I think it might have been. So they did a lot of community consultation before they made the decision to put their hand up for online voting. Their community is such that they're very keen on it, and they had lots of requests for it. But as far as engaging to make it happen next year, it's still a little bit early for that. So once the councils are selected and it's underway, then there is the opportunity to put in place a comms plan and a project plan and a community engagement plan to then assist the introduction of online voting.
So just bouncing off that, you mentioned that in your experience, and thank you Kate for asking one of the questions I was going to ask, about your experience and whether or not you saw a lift in participation. You talked about the fact that doing some engagement and community outreach around that is important if that's a result that you're seeking, and I think that's what certainly has driven our engagement in this so far. Presumably this cost would fall to individual councils, is that right? It would be over and above the cost, the $160,000 or whatever it is that is quoted in these figures. Or has there been some indication from government, Pam may be able to answer this, about whether or not they are willing to stump up some of that requisite cost in order to make this a success?
Good question. Not necessarily, but most of the clients, council clients we work with, have a voter encouragement budget or an engagement budget where they spend money on activities during the voting period to encourage people to vote or to explain STV or some aspect around the election. And so, and LGNZ at the same time had talked about a promotion campaign around council elections and online voting. And so the opportunity is there for that money to be used to increase the awareness of online voting.
You guys obviously have got a long history in operating in this space. Have you, since those early 2001 trial, or since you started working on online stuff since 2001, have you seen or experienced any issues of the nature that we have discussed or that we've had brought to us around security breaches. It might be an issue, something that you can't discuss in public, in which case that's fine, but it'd be helpful to have an indication if you're able.
The only security issues we've had have to do with postal voting.
I'm wondering, one of the things which the original DIA report recommends is smaller scale politically binding trials before the 2016 elections. Are you aware of any that have occurred, or have you been involved in any of those trials, or are you aware of the status of those trials?
There haven't been any trials in the local government space because the legislation and the regs hadn't been written to allow online voting for council. So this is part of this process. And the DIA, assuming it goes ahead, have said that they will change the regs and the act to allow, change the regs to allow online voting. So at this point in time, the answer is no, because we just simply haven't been allowed to.
Have you had any indication of when those regs might be changed that would then enable, and would that be early enough to enable some trials to be done before the 2016 election, or is that unlikely given the timeframes involved?
Two parts. It won't be done in time, but even so, the date for when council by-elections don't need to be run is 12 months out from next year. So come 8th of October this year, for any council extraordinary vacancies, at that point, a by-election doesn't need to occur. So there won't be any council polls or by-elections between now and October next year that would allow online voting.
That's helpful, thank you. Recommendations 11 and 12 refer to the need to provide or recommend that we try to provide reasonable and equitable access to all if we are to go down the track of voting. And I think Councillor Hawkins and his earlier questions of Mr Fleming flagged up that perhaps our current system doesn't necessarily provide reasonable and equitable access to all, given the transient nature of some of our populations. But has there been any work done by electionsnz.com to look at how we might be enabled to provide for this, given the very patchy nature of internet access, household internet access in some of our communities? And if not, how is that recommendation being provided for through this process?
Well, the access to the internet is really outside our control, obviously. Depends on the ISPs and your broadband network, etc. But you have to remember that online voting is just an alternative. It's not the only method to vote. It's coupled with postal. People have the choice of which voting method they use. And so going forward, we have to bear that in mind.
Would it be fair to say, though, given the way in which it's planned to be rolled out this time round, with the ballot paper arriving in the mailbox being the way that people get their information in order to vote online, is not actually going to increase access, in the sense that if you didn't receive your ballot paper in the mail, you're not going to be able to vote online anyway?
And it's also those who did receive their voter pack but can't actually get out to post it themselves. We have had discussions with
Muscular Dystrophy Association
just last week who are wanting to run an election that we're going to help them with. Plus also we have done work with the visually impaired in the past. Our software is compliant with international standards for that, so that those screen readers that they use, that's what those other people spoke to so well about. It was quite an enlightening experience for those folk to go through.
Okay. The two-factor authentication referred to in the original DIA report, using date of birth, is that what you guys anticipate using with your system? No.
The date of birth's not actually on the electoral roll, so that was a nice idea, but it doesn't exist.
So what two-factor authentication, is that the code?
Yeah. So what we have to do to satisfy that requirement 1.11 is that we are going to send out the first form factor in the voting pack and a second pack with another code.
So 2 separate packs. Recommendation 18 in the DIA report says that it would be preferable / important for a voter to be able to conduct all of their votes in the event that they have a multi-vote ballot paper online, if that was an option that was available to them. And presumably that is to avoid complications, confusion, frustration of having to do multiple things, and I guess potentially multi-vote scenarios where people think that they've only voted once, but they've actually voted online, and then they have also a ballot paper in front of them. How are those issues going to be mitigated, given that we have had no indication, I don't think, from the DHB or the Otago Regional Council that they have any interest in this technology?
Good question. It's an all or nothing approach. So the same, it comes back to equality of voting. You've got your postal voting paper with all the voting issues on, council, regional council, DHB. Online, you go to log in, exactly the same. You get presented with the 3 different elections, and you vote by one method, postal or online. When it comes to the DHB and the ORC, this is a common problem around the country with the rest of the councils. The legislation is such that those organisations have contracted to the council to run their election, and so as the council is the overriding organisation, the voting methods that the council uses are the voting methods that the other organisations use. So they don't really have the opportunity to say that they don't wish to partake in that voting method. It's an all or nothing approach.
For instance, you couldn't have ORC wishing not to have early processing, for instance.
And I guess my final question, and thank you, I know this has been a lengthy suite of questions. My final question, we had a citizen speak earlier and raise the question of how auditable the systems are, whether or not they are open source, whether or not they are available to a citizen who has concerns about the transparency of the process or the robustness of the process to audit. How possible is that with your systems? And what if not, if they aren't auditable by the general public, what are the processes of audit that are in place around those?
So in terms of the audit that we put our systems through, including the software, part of that is a code review, but it's done by an independent auditor. It's not open source, but it is reviewed. That's one of those requirements.
It comes back to a comment before about having an auditable environment for all parts of our process. So not only are we, in this particular case, audited and certified by an independent party, the DIA requirements require the online voting part of the process to go through a panel. That's part of the NZISM standards, and then after that, that would be reviewed by the GCIO, which is the Government's Central Information Officer, who will review the auditing and the certification and the documentation around the system to ensure that it meets the standards that they think are appropriate.
Councillor Hall.
When you go online and you put in your PIN number and your password, and you get halfway through filling out your paper and you decide you want to re-look at it, can you reopen that PIN and that password at a later time?
If you haven't completed the voting process, you can log off any time and come back in, but no vote has been cast.
That's all right, because Department of Statistics, once you open the password and the code, you have to complete because you cannot re-enter. So you can re-enter on yours.
Provided that you haven't submitted your vote and everything else that you haven't done is to be interpreted as a blank vote, then you're fine. Just don't complete it, just log off.
So you can look back on it any time.
That's
What Steve means is that in the online voting site, once you've selected your candidates, you then get presented with a submit button. And once you hit that submit button, that is recording your vote, and at that point you then can't go back in and see it again.
Yeah, I'm just nervous with the Department of Statistics. Even if you don't push the send button, you can't re-enter.
right. Right.
Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you, gentlemen. Just a couple of questions about relative risk, because I think that balancing question is one of the fundamental ones for us. You mentioned, and I'm not sure if I understood this correctly, that you've had far greater threats from a security perspective from postal voting than you have from online voting in the processes that you've run so far.
No, not quite right. The only problems we've had has been from postal. The threats that we've had have been controlled under online voting. And the threats under postal have been mitigated as well. As postmen still steal postal votes.
Right, and beyond that, because and I know that you can't put a number on it in terms of directly comparing what the risks are, but from a risk management perspective, how do you compare the risks beyond security, if there are in fact other risks, compare the relative risk of those two voting methods? How do you balance those things?
I'm not sure we balance them. We manage them. It's not like if one goes up, the other goes down, or anything like that.
No, I think it's okay. Wrong choice of words. Which of them is riskier from your point of view in terms of what you have to mitigate to bring? I'm assuming that you're saying that you're bringing them both down to the same level of risk through mitigation anyway. That's one of them may or may not require more work to get it to that point.
Yeah. Okay. So, for instance, if we get pieces of paper sent back to us, there's a risk that things get misinterpreted, which is usually why a recount is held, in the hope that, or the belief by a candidate who has just missed out, that a vote that perhaps ought to have gone to them, in fact, was either informal or went to someone else. Of course, when that's done online, there is no grey area. It's a vote, and it's very clear it's a digital vote, because all you've done is clicked on a candidate, and there is no opportunity to get an STV vote wrong. They can't put 2 1s, for instance. They can't go 1, 3, 4 and miss out the 2, that sort of thing. So the risks do manifest themselves slightly differently. From a public risk point of view in terms of internet security, then certainly we have done a lot with that, and that's an evolving thing. We keep talking to other operators of internationally of online voting. So we're talking to them. I've talked to the folk at the New South Wales Electoral Commission frequently. I have information here from them now. Other providers around the world, they're providers who are a Spanish-based company. There's an English-based company as well who rang me just before while we're waiting for the meeting to commence. So we're in constant contact with those people. We're swapping notes all the time.
And just lastly, in terms of risk from a statistical point of view, how much of a factor, if any, is the size of the population of electors? For example, we are a larger population than Porirua, but smaller than Wellington City Council. Are the relative risks different in those 3 scenarios or not?
Not in terms of the broader risks. So in terms of someone having a crack at the site, for instance, I don't think it really matters if it's a Porirua or a Dunedin or even if Auckland were involved. I don't think that risk would really change. It's a big risk that you mitigate as best as possible. The risk in terms of quantity comes back to making sure, particularly if it's an STV election, making sure that the recognition of those preferences is correct. So their volume actually has an effect.
Even so, though, the legislation is set up that for someone to determine that an election result has been materially affected requires them to make a petition for inquiry after the fact to a district court judge who will look at the evidence provided in such a petition and determine whether the result may have been affected and then decide on the course of action from there. So what I'm saying is there is a process under the legislation to go through if it was thought by anyone that the election had been compromised.
Councillor Thompson.
Look, I know this happens with paper voting anyway, but if you, with STV, if you do have 2 4s or whatever, does your system enable that to signal back to the voter that this, unless you correct this would be an invalid vote?
They don't even get to do that. So let's say if they're voting for council, they'll click on the most preferred, and it's just a click. They don't enter anything. It's a click and a 1 will appear. They click on the next one, a 2 will appear. They're not entering anything other than a click.
Right.
We've got it real simple.
Councillor Calvert.
I think they've been answered well enough, thanks.
Councillor Wilson, you have a question.
Sorry. 2 questions. One is, I thought I read somewhere when you were presenting, or a vote was held in another council, that the worthiness of this trial was limited by enough people taking part. I mean, if enough councils didn't take part, then it wasn't a particularly effective trial. Are you at the point that it is an effective trial now, or are we the ones that are going to tip it over the edge?
Ultimately, Cabinet have to decide whether it's going to go ahead. From an economics point of view, which is what I can answer, it's borderline right now, to be honest. It may not go ahead.
I'm not so much worried, and we all worried about the economics of it, but I'm more concerned about the effectiveness of it statistically as an effective trial at this point.
Yeah, and certainly that is where DIA and the Minister are coming from. In our discussions with them, when we looked at the 10 councils that we had up, they felt that those councils represented a good cross-section, a good representation for trial. So we expect that still to stand.
I think you were in the room when we had the Carolyn and David submit to us about how good it is to be able to with disabilities, and appreciating their disability probably suited an online voting but won't necessarily suit every disability. I'm just wondering, and this probably isn't so much about online voting, but it is about democracy and what you have to offer in your systems. Do you have, or have you ever considered having additional services that actually mean that the very disabilities that those people are talking about, or other disabilities, are covered in an ability to vote? Because it seems to me that is equally important as what we're looking at here.
Absolutely, except that the legislation just simply doesn't allow it.
Thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, I have perhaps I probably trust too many people too easily, but my question is sort of like along these lines. The problem I have here today to make this decision is 2 things. I feel if I was going to make a decision, what holds me back is the cost. You alluded earlier in your comments to, I think it was Councillor Hawkins, that why should we get the benefit of everyone else's trial without sharing in the cost? In other words, if we vote this down today, other people are doing the dirty work on our behalf. And I understand that, and I actually think, why should all councils not share in the cost of a trial? Because why should it fall to us to bear the cost for a trial, and then the benefits everyone sees in the future? But the other side of the equation I also see is that I would be reasonably confident that, well, I'm wondering what's the trigger if, for example, it came in that hackers came in and voted so that everyone called Smith voted for Aaron Hawkins and everyone called Jones voted for Councillor Benson Pope, and it was clearly proven that this was not statistically possible and that there was someone rigging or had got inside your processes. I actually think we almost need to go down that, welcome the hackers' opportunity, but why should it all be at the cost of this council? And that's the problem I have. Is 165,000 at a max going to cover that? From my point of view, I don't. Can you tell me why the citizens of Dunedin, the ratepayers of Dunedin would benefit from this trial.
Yeah, look, and to address your first point about the way it's been put together and who's paying for it, and perhaps every council could contribute, that's certainly something that I agree with you on. It's something we didn't have input into. The government made it clear from the outset they weren't going to contribute anything. Perhaps if every council chipped in for those prepared to trial it would have been a fairer model, but that's way beyond our control. I think just in terms of the cost, like your share of that 165 should end up about 90, 85 to 90, something like that. What I can tell you is if it goes ahead, and there's a couple of big fences to get over yet, if it goes ahead, it'll never be cheaper.
So there hasn't been a discussion with the Otago Regional Council governance body. About 10 days ago I was asked to raise it with their chief executive and did so, because of course the government didn't invite the participation of regional councils, just the territorial local authority. So I raised it with Chief Executive Boudica and suggested he might talk to his governance bodies about the possibility. That's why at this point the report can't be clear about whether they would participate or not. He did come back and say that if we sign up, then effectively it does put some pressure on them to do likewise, because otherwise in Dunedin, his words were, people would pass their electronic vote and then have to put their galoshes on and go down to the voting booth for the regional council election.
I think we need to clarify that, because what I took from you before was that if we go online, everyone goes online. The question is, do they pay for their share of it? That's the question.
Well, I guess the question is if they don't want to do it, if they don't want to participate online, is there an opt-out for them in terms of, because they have given the management of their process to us, so there's no way for them to choose or to opt out from us managing their voting process?
No, there's not. But so from a process perspective, yes, all or nothing. But from a cost share perspective, council can have that discussion with those other bodies and can come to an arrangement that it feels is appropriate with them in the normal course of business.
In terms of the DHB?
That's somewhat more fraught because we're not sure of the upcoming status of the next election.
And do you take IOUs?
I guess I'd like to follow up with a question here, and that is, if this isn't a question of you so much as maybe of a chief executive, if we are the agent, if Dunedin City Council is the agent that runs the election for DHB and the ORC, and they in the past have been obligated to pay their share, if we decide to go online, presumably they don't have a choice, but they pay their share.
I can't see how you could make them pay twice.
So I did, when I discussed it with Peter, so that I was discussing whether they were interested in participating. I wasn't aware that they were compelled, if you vote, to do so. I did indicate to him what their share of the cost would be if they chose to participate. I think if we choose to participate, we would have a hard job potentially forcing them to pay their share. But for a political decision you've made.
Well, can I follow that up and ask you if we have a hard job forcing them to pay their share the way we do it already?
No, but they don't have a choice whether to vote the way they do already, whereas under this system there's a choice. No, but you have a choice. So whether you feel comfortable making a vote that compels them to pay. On the other hand, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, so can I just... That's not my understanding that we don't have a choice, because on the DHB we're asked to decide whether or not we wish to appoint the DCC as our agent. If we chose not to, then of course we would have the cost of going it alone. So you might argue that's not really a choice at all. But I'm not sure that it's a question. I don't know that it is the case that
No, I appreciate that. What I was pointing out is that if we are retained as their agent, we make the call, and presumably in the past, when we're their agent, we made the call on how it was run, and they pay their share of it. So that's, but obviously we don't know the answer to my question at the moment. So, Councillor Wilson, do you have another?
Sorry, Your Worship, just the last part of the question, which was about whether or not there are issues for an organisation if part of their votes come in online and part of them are postal.
Philosophically, I don't think that could occur. It's not a case where you could have one vote for one organisation online and not for the other. Just logistically, it just wouldn't work. But I think the other point to bear in mind is that as far as the regional council is concerned, our FPP and the council and the DHB is STV. So there's a mix of voting systems there that at the moment our experience around the country elsewhere is that there is quite an error rate when there is a mix of FPP and STV, somewhere in the vicinity of 5%, where people, when it comes to the FPP one, in this case, number instead of tick. And of course, when you go to that on the online system, all those errors immediately disappear because the system makes sure that it's a correct vote. So, you know, that does then help the democratic process as far as the accuracy of voting.
Yeah, and I've no dispute with that, and that sounds great. But I guess the issue that I'm trying to tease out is if we opt in and the ORC is forced within the DCC boundaries to opt in with us by virtue of the fact that they have nominated us as their electoral agent, there are a whole load of people that vote in the ORC ballot that are outside of the Otago or the Dunedin City Council boundaries. So we then have a situation where, by virtue of the fact that some TLAs are participating and some aren't, the Otago Regional Council's ballot would be operated differently in different parts of their area, which to me throws up a problem. But I guess I was seeking some feedback as to how that would be managed.
The only option there for that not to be the case would be if all the councils in the ORC area were using online voting, but clearly that's not going to be the case, and so that is one of the logistical issues that just has to be considered and factored in for the first time round. 2019, you know, if it all goes to plan, that issue goes away, but you've got to start somewhere.
The same applies with the other councils too, the other TLAs.
Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, I'm helpful. It's helpful going and checking some of the advantages that are on page 14.3, and those have somewhat been addressed by the last couple of questions. There are two that I still want to get some clarity on, though. The advantages are that it's faster and easier voting for electors, and just testing my thinking, it's that I receive my electoral pack. I then decide that I want to do this online. I have to contact you and tell you that I want to do it online, or that you send that chip anyway.
You get it anyway.
But it won't be on the same day, obviously.
Should be.
You send them on the same day, separately.
So the scenario is that New Zealand Post will deliver to you your envelope with your voting paper in it, candidate profile, return envelope, and then in a separate envelope you will get a small piece of paper with your code on it that you match up with the PIN. Go to your iPad, your iPhone, your laptop, any device, and go to the online voting site, put in your PIN and pass, and go ahead and vote.
Well, you've made me more nervous because it just seems like that someone would be calling letterboxes much with more certainty. But
just to add to that, in not in the council realm, in all our other private elections where online voting is used with postal all the time, we put the PIN and password on the voting paper. We don't send them in two separate transactions. So once you've got your voting paper, Fonterra is the prime example, and your Fonterra voting paper, put your PIN number and your password and the web address to come and vote. So it's all in the one place.
that's interesting because I had some belief that when we did one of these things, we actually had to use our shareholders tag somewhere to get registered to do that. So I'm intrigued because I thought there was another system that...
For publicly listed companies through Computershare, that is the process. You have a shareholder number, and they then send you a code separately. So that's a different process altogether. But voting in elections, different deal. Voting for people, different deal.
Okay. And the other one that I just wanted to test was the easier participation for those overseas during the election period. And honestly, I haven't heard anything in their last answer that makes me think that's any easier, except because you still need someone at home to open it and tell you what those are. No?
No. On the electoral roll at the moment, 4% of parliamentary electors have a postal address overseas. So that's about 30,000 electors nationally. So those postal packs get sent overseas, and if you're in California, you get your voter pack after about 10 days. Have you got the time to fill that in and put it back in the post and get it back to New Zealand in time by the end of 3 weeks? Unlikely. The numbers around that are 4% get sent overseas. Of that, about 4.5% actually vote. So of the 4%, 4% vote by post, getting it back. So in that scenario, you've got your voting paper, got your second envelope, put and pass, go to the voting site, vote straight away. You don't have to worry about the postage. So it does allow them more opportunity to vote.
Okay, so just bearing that a bit more, the situation there is if I'm travelling overseas and I have to be away for a month, it doesn't actually assist that case though?
Yes, it does, because we have a mechanism in place that if you know you are going to be overseas somewhere, you can tell us before we print the voting papers to change the address to where you might be during the 3 weeks so you can get that piece of paper and the codes.
Okay, thanks very much.
Councillor Hall.
Notice in your estimate between 90 and 165,000, to come up with that, what is your overall cost?
The total cost for the project, you mean?
Yeah.
Total cost for the project is about 1.1, shared between the councils.
So if those 13 all take up, it'll be $90. And I see you've got 165 there. So I haven't worked out at 165 how many councils will you need to take it up. Because at the present time you've got 8 councils taking it up. And at $90, that comes to 1.17. The 8 councils have already taken up.
No, it's not. That's not the same price for every council.
No, it's not the same.
We've got some, like Masterton is relatively small,
Yep.
for instance.
So how do we get an estimate of the need between 90 and 165?
Well, the estimate is 165, if you're clear on that. With the disbursements to the other organisations, it should be 90,000 for the DCC. I need to be clear on that.
So Councillor Hall, I think the issue is that the cost for Dunedin is 165. If the DHB and ORC don't contribute, that's the cost we bear. If they both contribute, as we'd like them to, the cost is 90,000. That's the case.
That cost sharing arrangement, there's a formula that works that out. It's based on the number of electors, the number of candidates. There's a spreadsheet, a matrix that you plug all the numbers into and out pops the cost share. And so it depends on what those are. But in general terms,
It's on per voter, not on per council.
that's right. And when we talk to our other councils, we generally say that the council's share of the cost is about 50%, DHB is about 30%, and the regional council is usually about 20%. Each council varies, but that's sort of the basis.
So the whole cost is based on the number of voters.
And that's fluctuating a little bit.
Right, I think we've exhausted the questions. Thank you very much for that extensive set of explanations. Thank you. Appreciate it. Councillors, we have been going for just on 2 hours. I'm going to move from the chair that we take a 10-minute recess. Seconded, Councillor Wilson. Put all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carries. Come back.
Yeah.
Okay, councillors, we'll get underway. We have had questions, and we are now at the stage of coming into debate. So, for the purposes of debate as much as anything else, is anyone wanting to move something with regard to this item?
Not even for the purpose.
This could be a very long meeting.
No, we don't have to move anything, do we?
Yes, before you do, the Chief Executive would like to update you.
I've talked to Peter Bodica. Peter hasn't put it to his councillors yet. However, he said he understood in a way that I didn't, that if you agree to participate, then for Dunedin only, the ORC is also compelled to participate for Dunedin and through the same process. He said he can't presuppose the views of his councillors, but in the discussions that he's had with a number of them, there is an understanding of the interest, and if you decide that you feel that it will improve the voting percentage or voting rates, then he imagines his councillors will be receptive to that view. That's not a commitment, but he said he's certainly very happy to put it to his councillors and for us to have that discussion as a sort of a partnership.
Okay, Councillor.
I'd like to move option 2 to decide to withdraw from the online voting trial.
Okay. Is there a second? Councillor Hall, do you wish to speak to that in the first instance?
Just very briefly, there's been a lot of discussion already, but very briefly, even if this was to increase the number of people voting, and people talk a lot about voting percentages and trying to get above 50%, I'm not convinced that it actually will increase the quality of the voting or the number of informed people voting. And for me, I think we should never lose sight of the fact that in a democracy, it's informed voters that we should really be encouraging, and not just making it so easy for people that they can simply flick something off between looking at Facebook entries. So even if it was secure, which I have doubts about, 817 points that you have to address in the process worries me, even though a lot of them are in our existing system. The fact that the new ones are electronic and the new ones are in cyberspace, I think, is an essential. It is going to remain a problem. In terms of what's good for Dunedin, we would be best served to wait and see on this. We will always have opportunities later if a proven electronic system it becomes available later.
Further speakers? Councillor Wiley.
Being on the Digital Community Trust, I should be supporting this and everything digital, but in this case I will not be supporting it. I should be supporting this, but not going ahead with the trial. The biggest issue for me is that it is a trial, and it, to me, should be paid for by the DIA, and should be coming out of ratepayer funds. And the other side of that is, if I'm around this table after in the next term, I will be probably supporting it for 2019 after it's been proven.
Councillor Staines.
I too will be supporting this resolution. I was very much in favour of taking part in the online trial when it was first mooted to us. However, at that point, the cost to ratepayers was not clear. And I think that in this situation where $165,000, maybe if ORC joins and pays something towards it, great, but it's still a significant cost to our ratepayers for something that may not, in fact, prove to be a viable option for the future. So this is greenfield stuff. If the government, DIA, were prepared to step up and say, we want to run this trial because We believe that it'll reduce the cost to the nation for running both local body elections and national elections, and for that reason we will fund the trial in order to prove that it's workable. Then I think I would be 100% behind it. This is asking the ratepayers of a few cities to fund what rightly should be the cost of all voting residents of New Zealand, and for that reason I can't support it.
Councillor Kelly.
Just for clarity, is the councillor Staines foreshadowing an alternative motion? Because that would be helpful to know.
No, I think Councillor Staines is supporting the motion in front of us. Is that correct?
I would be quite happy to foreshadow a motion that was to the effect of the city supporting continuation and participating in the trial, provided at least 50% of the cost was covered by DIA.
Okay. Come to that. Councillor Kelly.
I support this motion, and I wouldn't support a 50% motion. I think there's a whole lot of issues that need to be resolved before we go ahead with this sort of motion, and they're in the national interest, not in Dunedin in particular's interest. If the government wants to do a trial, the government should be doing a trial. It's not something we should be wearing the cost of, and it's also not something that we should be wearing the downside effects of a trial of. It's going to be probably more of a dog's breakfast down here than it would be in other places, partly because of the regional council issues that Councillor McTavish has teased out, and for a variety of reasons I think that we are less useful for a trial because there's more things that can go wrong. We're also hearing that there's security issues that have made other parts of the world pull back from doing what seems to be a good plan, and we haven't had the opportunity of testing out what their issues were. We've had somebody talking to us in public forum, and we've had people who will receive the money from us to do it telling us that they think it's a good idea, but the only reason I heard them say really was that if we don't support it, then it might not go ahead because not enough other councils will support it. If it doesn't go ahead and the government wants it to be trialled, then the government can make it go ahead in the government's time with the government's money, and that's my preferred option, not ours.
Councillor Lord.
Yes, I'm going to support this. I think I can't say as well as what Councillor Staines said, but I actually do believe there was some benefit, and I would be prepared to second the motion that paid for 50% of the cost, because I think there is some benefit to Dunedin. I just make it very clear that my reason for not supporting the proposal was that I believe it's the money, not the fact of the integrity of the system. I'm a pretty big supporter of online voting, the internet security.
Further speakers. Councillor McTavish.
I will also be supporting this motion, but for quite different reasons, it seems, than a number of people around the table. In my view, if we have an opportunity to improve our electoral system and make it more accessible to a wider range of people, that shouldn't be something that we're quibbling over financials on. That should be something which is inherent to our democracy and something that we take pride in taking steps forward on. But to me, I think there are still too many questions around the system for me to be comfortable endorsing it at this point. If we had heard today that it was possible and it was scheduled for us to have a number of trials, local government sector trials of this system before we got to voting day in 2016, I would feel more comfortable endorsing this as a process. As it is, I take the point by the gentleman that sat in front of us, and I think delivered some pretty strong and obviously very robust answers to some of the questions that we have asked. I take the point that given the timing issues, a public trial will not be possible. But I go back to the DIA paper, which unfortunately I've had to look up online, so I'm sorry, it's very small. But some of the key findings of that DIA paper, some of the core findings were things like public trust and confidence must be maintained. And in my view, that's the fundamental bottom line of any democratic system. It only functions to the degree that people have confidence in the system. And, you know, I find myself in a slightly fraught situation because I do think it is unfair that the risk of trialling a new system sits with a small number of TLAs around the country. But when I think about what is best for my constituents here in Dunedin, I find it difficult to say that it is in our interest, in the interest of democracy here in Dunedin, to step up and take that risk and to take the risk of public confidence that step would take. So from my perspective, I'll be voting against this, not because of financial cost. I think that should be a secondary issue to anything else that we consider. But for the very fact that I think public confidence in the system must be built up and must, that is the core principle that we need to be standing by. And I'm not sure that I could say to my constituents I have absolute faith in this system until it has been trialled. I think preferably with procedures that aren't actual elections before it hits the ground. I know that Councillor Wilson has been doing some thinking around a potential consequential motion about ensuring that we have got systems and processes in place for blind and other people with disabilities to ensure that they are able, their rights as citizens to vote in a confidential way are upheld. I think that is totally critical, and I have to admit I was a bit shocked by some of the things that we heard today from the association, but I think that can and ought to be dealt with in a way that can manage that under the existing system, rather than stepping into a system that we have some questions around before it is proven. And so I would be supporting that consequential motion and moving it if it's not forthcoming.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Worship. I agree that I don't believe this is a financial matter, albeit it does have some bearing, and I think the uncertainty of the costs is unfortunate. I think I moved or seconded the motion that got us to the point that we're at today to discuss this, and I am supportive of technology being a solution to voting for certain outcomes. However, I'm really concerned after that was before the representation review, and I think we've got substantial changes coming in the representation review, which I personally want to understand the effects of and the implications of clearly in the next voting round, because I think it would be fraught to try and change the system of voting and how we're voting at the same time, because we will not be able to analyse those results. That's why I'm going to not support that's why I'm going to support this motion today. But I do believe that we do need to move on having a online voting system, but especially with the fragility of the New Zealand Post system and our dependence on that, but it has to be done with good legislative and understandable processes, and this, with regret, hasn't happened. I think it's fraught when local government New Zealand has obviously pushed for this, but DIA has led it. And I don't think we've controlled particularly well the process, or haven't had that opportunity to understand or control that process. I respect the information that we've received from everyone here. I think the one speaker that concerned me most was Bo Mara's, and how the legislation isn't keeping up with voting and the trends in New Zealand of any sort. And I think some very good work perhaps the university could undertake in that regard. I do want to foreshadow a subsequent motion that Council seek DIA and LGNZ support for urgent work to enable independent confidential voting systems for people with disabilities. I think that's quite a separate issue though from online voting, But it certainly has come up well and truly with the Blind Foundation here today, but it's not just about blind. I think there are a number of groups that will be affected by that and deserve, people in rest homes and other disabilities who deserve that right, democratic right to vote confidentially, and that's a separate piece altogether, but that's, I hope they will get some support later.
Councillor Thompson.
Look, I've already foreshadowed that I have to leave at 4:45 for another meeting, so whatever my stated intentions are, I may not get a chance to exercise them anyway. But I'm going to vote against this, and part of the reason I'm going to vote against it is because I cannot for the life of me see that I could, with any conscience, vote in favour of an alternative subsequential motion which says that all of the things that we're worried about are fine as long as we get to pay $80,000 less than we're paying now. So if it is the view of people that the reason that they support this motion and don't support a trial is because of concerns around security and any number of other issues, please don't then turn around later and say, well, we'll forget all that as long as it's $40,000 or $50,000 cheaper. So I don't want to be part of that. As somebody who does have to go into a voting booth and fill out somebody else's paper for them, I have considerable sympathy for the views that were expressed by people earlier. And I also see on a daily basis the things that other people take for granted that are not available to some sectors of our population. And I believe that the small end of the security risk in this is in fact no different than the security risk we face at the moment with postal voting. People can go and whip a postal vote out and fill it out and send it in. People can have their vote denied by putting 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on their STV voting form and never even know that their vote didn't count. So there's all sorts of things that are wrong with the current system, and I totally accept that there could be manipulation in a small way. The reason I would support the proposal and therefore vote against this motion is that the real concern is the absolute meltdown, the concerted effort to undermine an electoral process for whatever misguided and stupid reasons. And you're not going to solve that or answer that question by a trial anyway, because you'll only know when that happens when it happens, and a trial won't tell you anything. And my final reason is that I don't like freeloading, and I think that if we believe that this offers opportunities to people in a wider sense in our community to participate in a more equal way in our voting systems, then we shouldn't be allowing somebody else to take all the cost of determining that. We should share some of it. And so for all of those reasons, if I get a chance to, I'll vote against this motion. But please don't ask me then to, well, I guess I will vote in favour of one that says we'll do it for slightly cheaper because that would get what I want. But I can't understand the hypocrisy of that.
But you'll do it.
It won't be me issuing that. Further speakers. Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'll be brief because it's in my best interest that Councillor Thompson remains in the room. I can't support this either, and it's something that I've wrestled with. Something that I've wrestled with, I think, a lot over the past few days, trying to come to a position. It's not a silver bullet. It is another potential tool that we have to not just increase participation in our democratic system, but as we've heard, allow access to our current system to a broader range of people that are in our community. And they don't want a special system, with all due respect to the subsequential motion, a special system just for them. We've heard quite clearly that they want access to the system that everyone else has, and this is a way potentially that they can do that. There is some risk with any voting system. Our current system isn't 100% safe, we've heard that. The question is about balancing the acceptability. The question is about the acceptability of that risk, and for me, that's a question of balancing the potential threats and potential benefits against the likelihood that these things are going to happen. And we've heard concerns from the IT community locally and nationally, very well organised over the past few days they've been, and concern from support groups for the visually impaired community who have come and presented to us today. We know that it will definitely make it easier for the people that delegation represents to participate in our system, versus it might, under the doomsday scenario, it might, should someone, a rebellious teenager with nefarious means get a hold of it, cause a huge issue for the overall integrity of the election, in which case, that is a matter of, of national security and national importance, and would be addressed as such. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm keeping an eye on the time, so I won't support this. It concerns me too that cost is a reason. $165,000 max. A few pool tiles out of Mosgiel, a few light bulbs at University of Otago Oval. I mean, when it comes to core business, it doesn't get much more core business than the functioning of our democratic system. And we can wait. If we're waiting for the perfect system and the foolproof system, we'll be here for a very long time. I don't see that as a justification necessarily to participate with a system that hopefully will increase, maybe not in number, maybe not, but at least the availability within our population to the current systems that we have. Thanks.
Further speakers? Well, before I come to Councillor Van der Westhuizen, for his right of reply, I won't be supporting this motion. However, I have considerable sympathy for some of the arguments put forward in support of it. But bottom line for me is, I think we need to be going to online voting. I think that we're going to have to get there at some point. I think it offers advantages to people other than the disabled. However, I would comment that not only do I think the way that the cost of it has been allocated to councils is inequitable, it is also excessive. And I think it's worth noting that this is another example of central government, whilst on the one hand criticising local government for being inefficient and less cost effective or whatever, making this particular trial way more expensive than it needed to be and imposing that cost on our ratepayers. And I think that is worse. And we've heard in instances in the last few years of even right up to cabinet ministers criticising local government for the way it spends money, and local government has actually made huge strides in efficiencies, this council in particular. And at the same time, central government doing things only the most expensive way. The way we do our local alcohol policy arrangements, for instance, could be much cheaper done if we organise them ourselves, but the methods are imposed on us. And this is a case where a method has been imposed on us that is not necessary, the double post out, but it's been imposed and we are the ones that would have to bear it. So I just note that. But nonetheless, I think that this is important enough to support. So I can't support this motion. Councillor Van der Westhuizen, will reply.
I entirely agree with Mayor Cull that we need to go online at some point. I would like to respond to Councillor Hawkins, whose argument that we shouldn't wait for the perfect system because we'll be waiting forever for that. And I agree with that as well. But I don't think that we should be waiting for the perfect system. I do think that we will eventually be going online. Today's vote for me is, are we going to go for a proven system, or are we going to start fiddling with something new at considerable expense? For me, voting is something which you need to take just a bit more seriously than most things. And a proven system, with all its warts, and I have some very personal reservations about the current system, it is what it is. It delivers a result that people are comfortable with, that they know about. And in the event that this trial was to go ahead and something odd was to come up, I think we would create a tremendous amount of distrust in the community of having rushed in too soon. I agree with the Mayor that we need to go online at some point, but that point is not now. We have a proven system. These other systems are beginning to be trialled in other places. Us trialling them as well is not going to do anything for Dunedin ratepayers. I think we need to just withdraw from this online voting trial.
Okay, we're going to put it...
Vision, please.
Vision, okay.
Councillor Benson-Pope. Councillor Calvert.
Aye.
Councillor Hall.
Aye.
Councillor Hawkins.
No.
Councillor Lord.
Aye.
Councillor McTavish.
Aye.
Councillor Noon.
Aye.
Councillor Peat.
Aye.
Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Thompson.
No.
Councillor Vandervis.
Aye.
Councillor Wiley.
Yes.
Councillor Wilson.
Yes.
Mayor Cullen.
No.
Carried 10-4.
Carried 10-4. Thank you. Move on to the next. I'm sorry.
Having heard the arguments that it would be conceited of me to do that, I have decided not to.
Okay. Councillor Wilson, you had a subsequential motion.
Yes, I think Pam's got it up there. The reason, I think there's quite different issues here. It's about disability voting, and there is no reason why some of this couldn't happen actually before 2016 or any elections. I don't think it's limited to just the voting system for local bodies either. I think it's probably one that they have an issue with much wider than at general elections as well. And so I think that there's a separate need to look at all the disabilities, of which we've only heard from one today. There may be others that need a completely different answer that online voting won't work for. And so this motion is that the council seek DIA and Local Government New Zealand support for urgent work to develop the independent confidential voting system for people with disabilities.
Is there a second? Second to Councillor Calvert. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Calvert, or is there any other speakers? Councillor Thompson.
I'll just speak and go. When you urge governments to develop separate systems to assist people with disabilities, what you do is condemn them to further inconvenience, and we've seen examples of that generation after generation after generation. What you need to do is to put in place systems that don't discriminate in the first place. And for that reason, I don't believe that this is the appropriate way forward. I accept that there may be things, and we do them. We put ramps into buildings, and we do it to assist, but able-bodied people can walk up the ramp as well. We put things in place where we don't have alternatives, but increasingly in society today, we have stopped trying to do things that create two different systems and perpetuate discrimination when there are alternatives that don't need to do that. So were I here, I would vote against it, but I can't be.
Your Worship, could the word deleted, system be deleted? And that I hopefully would. get rid of that problem.
To develop. There's no now. You take system out, there's no now.
To develop.
And can I offer an alternative, which I was going to raise exactly the same issue. I think the sentiment, if I'm correct, is that we want the existing system to work for all people, to provide a confidential, independent voting system for all. So if it's reframed to say that the Council seek DIA and LGNZ support for urgent work on the existing voting system to ensure that it provides the opportunity for independent, confidential voting for all, I think that
I think someone should get those words to Pam, and so we can get them up, because if that's what the mover and seconder want to change it to, we need to know what we're voting on.
Too much happening.
Society is the same.
Seven questions. I've just got some.
Tell us that, because it's just
So can I, right, the mover and seconder, can the mover and seconder check this, please, to ensure that that's actually what we're considering?
I'm liking it.
Okay. Further speakers. I will speak to this just very briefly. It does seem to me that if the DIA, if this were put to the DIA, they would say, well, that's what we intended with online voting. So I find this a little ironic. Obviously, I can support this because I didn't support the previous one. Any further speakers? Okay. So the word, just for the mover and seconder's benefit, the word electoral has been changed to voting to distinguish it from the STV PP choice. That's the electoral system. This is the voting system. Councillor Benson.
Mr Chairman, just to say it's hard not to support the sentiment. I think the wording is much better than it was, but you know it doesn't mention the people like apple pie as well. And so I think, and to take your point, it is actually meaningless in the context of the wider conversation we had. There's no reason why this approach couldn't be made, but who's going to vote against something that would further empower our communities, especially when you've just made the observation you have about where we've just been?
Further speakers.
Only that. I mean, I take the point of those that have talked again about online voting, but for some of us around the table, we don't feel confident that that would offer an alternative at this point that we could have full confidence in. And I'm not sure that it's fair to lump in all solutions to existing problems and say online voting is the panacea, because I'm pretty confident that's not what the DIA report said, and I'm pretty confident that there are alternative ways to improve our existing system. I think for me, for example, hearing today from two members of, or a member of our community and a national organisation president who were, or representative, who were saying it made a massive difference to us to have a program available that enabled the electoral information provided on voters to be read to us. to me that seems like a fairly simple thing that could be provided pretty easily as part of the 2016 election. We do it with our existing information online. Now we have a thing that you click and it says read it to me, or voice or something, and if that's something that's required, I would have thought that would be something which could be fairly easily instigated and doesn't require a change to our voting system and the inherent risk that sits around that, and that we have deliberated about at length today. So I think that this is a separate issue. I think that there are alternative solutions available, and yes, I'm sure that online voting will be part of that in the future, but I'm not sure that it's fair to say that this is equal to an online voting system, and that's the only solution.
Councillor Cowan.
I haven't got full confidence that we will receive useful support from DIA and LGNZ on this, but what I particularly like about it is that it's talking about accessibility to the voting system, and it isn't just people who are visually impaired or a particular group. The group that I first thought about voting who didn't find it accessible, I think, were people with dementia who will increasingly, there will be an increasing number of people with dementia. I think this also could include a way of allowing a power of attorney for somebody to exercise their voting right, for example, because for some people that would be the thing that would have achieved this objective. There's a variety of different ways of giving everybody the ability to involve themselves with a voting system, and different sorts of people might have different sorts of solutions, but the widest range of people we can get who want to participate in the voting system should be able to. It's fundamental, and it's part of our international and our national obligations. It is arguably the first and sole obligation to the citizen to allow them to make a democratic choice.
Councillor Wilson, do you want to exercise your right of reply?
I do. I agree with the last two speakers. This is a completely separate vote from online. Even if we had voted a moment ago to go online, we don't control that. This vote, this motion would have still stood, because we, as we heard, that the government and cabinet decide whether that online voting happens or not. This is about ensuring that someone starts addressing those underlying problems with the legislation, which is archaic and probably hasn't been thought about and looked at for years, but gives the voice to the people who've come along here today and submitted. It's also about looking at a much broader disability or opportunities for this, and I just think it's giving voice to the section 29, I think it was, of the Statement of Rights, and we need to address those issues, and obviously they're not being addressed at the moment. In fact, the government may not even be aware of it. So it's just a heads up, quite independent of the previous vote, and I don't want those 2 points to be confused.
Okay, going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item 15, the amended draft camping control bylaw.
While staff are coming up, Mr Chairman, I'll move the minutes of the hearing subcommittee of 25-28 August be noted.
First part.
Seconded.
You quite right. Sorry, I missed that. Is there a seconder? Seconded, Councillor Peake. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Welcome. Would you like to kick off with any comments, or do you want to go straight into questions?
Just a quick comment, I guess, from the last time this came before council at the end of June through the hearings process. Only minor changes to the bylaw which you see before you today, the final draft. So happy to take questions on it.
Questions, Councillor Benson.
Just one of the issues that and I'll speak to the report in due course, but one of the issues that was raised by submitters was the issue of funding for both enforcement and obviously probably not insignificant cost of improved signage. And I wonder if Mr Saunders could make some comment about how that's going to, those upfront costs are going to be, well, the signage in particular, and the rationalisation of existing signage are going to be coped with in terms of existing budgets before we do get any income from infringement fees.
Certainly. So the costs last year of monitoring the bylaw, which were reported in the June report, were around $45,000. So the money required to implement the new bylaw, should it go through with the appropriate signage, would be taken from that budget. And then obviously the ongoing enforcement costs would be offset to an amount we couldn't predetermine by potential revenue through infringements.
Further questions? Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Richard. I just have a question around, and it's mentioned a few times in the report, the concept of the local responsible camper and the allowances that have been made for that through the permitting system. Can you talk a bit, and maybe I've missed it, but about what the criteria would be for granting that permit or not for our local responsible campers? And is proof of address one of the criteria?
Certainly. So through the submissions, we did receive a number from residents who do go and freedom camp and have equipment that they believe ensures that there are no adverse effects on the environment or communities, which is what the bylaw is trying to achieve. Through the clause in the proposed bylaw, which provides for us to grant consent for, or discretionary council consent for freedom camping, if we determine that the proposal that they put to us would ensure those effects were mitigated, then we can grant them approval to do that under this bylaw.
And that same process would be open to anybody, whether they were visiting?
Yes, correct.
Councillor Van.
In clause 8 on page 1511, council may enforce consented freedom camping. There seem to be fairly wide powers to be given to a freedom camping enforcement officer based on someone being perceived to be freedom camping. This perception of someone actually freedom camping, is that something which you've been able to rigorously define? Is it someone sleeping in a car? Is it someone parked somewhere where freedom camping is allowed? I mean, I'm just wondering how these quite wide powers could be actioned given that they are predicated on someone actually freedom camping. What if they say they're not freedom camping?
Yes, so the definition of freedom camp is within section 3 of the bylaw, so that would be the definition that any enforcement officers would be using when monitoring. And there would have to reasonable grounds that based on the interpretation of freedom camp in section 3 that the person that they are speaking to or observing is in fact freedom camping.
So it's a judgment of the enforcing officer?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Richard, can you please just walk me through with the definition of self-contained vehicles and how they're identified?
Yes, so the self-contained is a New Zealand standard, 5465, so it's a minimum 3 days self-containment for water supply, grey water and wastewater, and that is that amount varies depending on the number of people that the vehicle is certified for. And then anyone who is certified under the New Zealand standard would have both a sticker on the back of the vehicle identifying them as a certified vehicle and a warrant on the front identifying when it was inspected and certified, when that expires and how many people that vehicle is certified for based on how much water and grey water and wastewater they can they provide for. and that standard is issued by either a registered plumber, gas fitter or drain layer, or the New Zealand Motor Caravan Association are also certified to provide those, to undertake the inspections.
Okay, so they'll be easily identified to the community and to the whoever's checking on them. Okay, perfect. What about, what discussions have you had with the Motor Caravan Association and their growth areas?
So the Motor Caravan Association have been fully engaged through this process, and through their submission were supportive of the approach. Obviously all of their members must be certified self-contained in order to be a member, and the proposed bylaw does provide a number of opportunities for their members to camp in Dunedin.
How does this bylaw fit in with the likes of Thames, Coromandel and Marlborough?
Very, very similar. The general approach for most councils now is to provide, sorry, I shouldn't say most councils, the councils that we have reviewed, such as Thames and Marlborough and Queenstown Lakes, provide limited opportunities for non-self-contained freedom camping and directing those to commercial sites, and provide more opportunities for self-contained throughout their district, excluding them generally from built-up residential areas in the case of Queenstown and Thames, so I don't know the Marlborough one in great detail.
Okay. When I look at this bylaw, what about monitoring at areas such as Kensington Oval, Vauxhall Yacht Club, city lookout spots, etc.? And I'm thinking of the yacht club and the rowing clubs.
Yes, so the enforcement program, which would be developed if this bylaw was adopted, would have to include a monitoring of particular areas which are deemed to be camping hotspots, and could also include responding to complaints from the public. In areas we know about, such as Kensington Oval, and a number of areas on the peninsula, obviously be sites that would be visited regularly, and would also be ones we'd ensure there was the appropriate signage to inform campers.
Okay, so self-contained would still be able to park at those spots?
Yes.
Okay, non-self-contained? No. Okay. McAndrew Bay will no longer be a camping site?
No camping.
Okay. And apps and how these campers find, is that going to be updated if this is relatively quickly if this is passed?
It will be, yes. So we have good relationships with most of the app providers and website providers for camping. So they've been happy to work with us in the past, and I see no reason why that wouldn't continue, so we'll get that information updated.
Okay. And one final note, it's going to be a $200 fine?
Correct.
Okay, and what sort of process will that go through to get that,
Oh, the best way to explain it, it's the same infringement process as a parking ticket. So 28 days, then a warning notice, and then a further 28 days to pay, and then off to collections. It is something we have flagged through discussions with other councils, the risks of particularly international travellers who rent vehicles and then leave. Currently there is no provision to collect that money from either rental companies there is no provision to collect from rental companies. That's something that a number of councils and the industry are in discussions with the government at the moment.
So the ticket will be for the occupants and not for the vehicle?
That's correct.
Councillor Kelvin.
I wonder whether these are sort of just a couple of tweaky things that maybe the legal people could have a wee look at. Under 3 in general, the interpretation stuff, 2 things. I think it would be quite useful if the enforcement officer says a person appointed as an enforcement officer by the council under the Act, because it's our enforcement officer, not just any old one. I mean, they might have been appointed. And the second thing is, I think it would be good if it could be read without reference to the Act for people who want to see whether they can do something or not do the something. I think it would be useful to have attached to it meanings, so as that when you saw camping ground has the meaning given in section 5.3 of the Act, that anything that refers to it is attached so as that somebody can actually read just this document and not go to any other things. And so I don't think those things necessarily affect the bylaw, but if we could have an attachment to it so as that all you need is that, if you want to know whether you're doing the right or wrong thing. Is that?
Yeah, we can certainly provide those links, absolutely.
So, Councillor, could just to clarify, is what you're suggesting a glossary, an attached glossary?
I'd say yes, 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 and not necessarily a link that you then can't get back for, but actually so as that you could print it out, look at it, and say yes, yes, that's what it means. This.
Councillor.
I'm happy to move the recommendations on 15.1a, b and c, especially with the proviso that we have a document that does explain to people with the glossary what they can and can't do. To me it all seems very reasonable, and thank you for that.
Second to that, secondly Councillor Calvert. Councillor McTavish.
Thank you. Your Worship, I have a question which relates, and I'm not sure whether to address this at staff or the panel. It relates to the suggestion that the peninsula ought to be a no camping area. And I need to make a statement in order for this question to make sense. It seems to me that what we're doing is we are shifting potential campers from built-up areas, built-up environments, where clearly there have been some issues, and we're saying you can't camp here, but it's okay for you to camp adjacent to some fairly significant and fairly sensitive wildlife areas. And I'm thinking of places like the end of Seal Point Road, the car park there. There's a number of submissions on Teodoni, where, yes, there aren't going to be the same residence issues because there are no residents, but clearly there are some sensitivities around the number of visitors that we have there, the times of day that they are there, the extent to which they are well versed or not in interacting with wildlife in a responsible way. So I guess my question is, were those issues that were considered by the panel, and if so, how is it their view that they are going to be mitigated?
Mr Chairman, I'd like to thank Councillor Vandervis for moving the recommendations, and I'm sure the issues around the interpretation and so on can be more than adequately coped with in all the brochures, which will have to be rewritten anyway as a consequence of this. First of all, let me thank my colleagues for the work that was done on this, and the staff, and also the very substantial number of submitters. It's an interesting process, and I think where we've got to is a much better situation than the quite fraught situation the previous council made sure we inherited, and that many of you who are involved in that have tried desperately to correct incrementally with no success. However, this is not going to be perfect, and one of the things that will make it as close to workable as possible is substantial new signage, alerting, a rewrite of all the information that goes to people and is available to people on the multiple apps, travel apps around the place, decent signage that the committee has asked for, the hearings panel has asked for, at entry points to the, particularly the peninsula, but to other entry points. I'm sure, as we heard from the answer to the question that my colleague asked about the permitted side, there is a sensitive and sensible accommodation for whomever for a longer term should circumstances, tradition, habit, school holidays require a different scenario. And in terms of the special nature of the peninsula and other coastal and other, I guess, wildlife areas, one of the ways that we wish to be positive and welcoming is by not only alerting people to the reasons for particular restrictions, but also thanking them on the other side of the entry point warning for their consideration of the environmental and ecological treasures that we have in this city. So I think that a quite sensitive path has been trodden between meeting the concerns of a lot of people, providing more enhanced protection of very sensitive areas. One of the most interesting things that I wasn't fully aware of was the exodus in the dark from Tairon after the Little Blue Penguin viewing, for example, at Pilots Beach. And the need for people who are in camper vans to actually not have to drive all the way back into town. So we've tried to accommodate the needs as they were expressed to us by submitters, and I think we do have a pressure to get this work begun so that staff can hit the road running well before the beginning of the new season. But I think we're going to see, I certainly hope we're going to see a much better managed arrangement than we have had in the past.
So, I take it, just to clarify where you're answering questions.
I was going to answer that question.
Yeah. So, do you wish to answer or ask? I'm just clarifying that we're still in question time.
Oh, you are? Well,
and it's been, there's a mover and a seconder, but we haven't got, I want to clear all the questions away first, and I take it that Councillor Vincent Pope's statement was an answer to
well, I'm not sure that it quite answered the question. I'm happy to answer that question now. The answer was that we did look at Peninsula wide, but we were advised that we didn't have under the Act, and we are limited to what the Act provides for. We didn't have the ability to do that under the Act. I can say that having now been or suffered 3 hearings on this with 2 legislative changes, that I think we're at a point that unless we do this really well, and I take some confidence from the staff that we will do this really well, we will end up with exactly the same problems that drove us to have a free camping bylaw in the first place, which was a whole lot of people camping around sensitive sites. So I hear what your concerns are, but I think we've got a vision as to how that can be controlled better, and I certainly think that I will address some of those issues in my right of reply as well.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And given that you have such confidence in the processes that staff will be putting in place to ensure that sensitive sites are not that are dealt with in the sensitive way, perhaps staff would be able to comment about how areas like that car park at the end of Seal Point Road will be managed or monitored to ensure that we're not getting excessive numbers of people basically sitting on the beach waiting for penguins to come in, scaring them away last thing at night and first thing the next morning, because that's my concern.
So I guess the direction we've taken with the bylaw is to try and mitigate those effects that we're most aware of, which were coming from the non-self-contained campers. So all of those campers, of which there were significant numbers on the peninsula, will no longer be able to camp there. The self-contained, which by their definition are able to mitigate most effects, and I do appreciate your point around the numbers of them, there are no specific controls on them, but there is the ability for us at any time to review if we are made aware of issues. Through the hearings, those concerns were raised, but not so that there weren't a high number of submitters raising those concerns, and what we've done, we believe, is to find a balance there that allows us to control those potential impacts while still providing for camping. But certainly it is something that we can continually monitor, and where those areas are identified as high risk, we will make sure there is a higher monitoring and enforcement presence as well.
So given that, and thank you for that, that does give me some less cause for concern. Would staff be happy with an additional recommendation that requested that there was monitoring of the numbers of campers in locations adjacent to sensitive wildlife habitat, that being, for example, Seal Point Road, car park, or potentially the Tironi Reserve, which was also flagged up a number of times in... Sorry,
it's not hard surface.
Tironi would not have camping under the definition because there's no sealed or hard surface for parking on, so that one's...
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess Brighton would be the other one that was of concern for people concerned about penguins.
So we would anticipate through the monitoring that we will get a very good, clear indication of numbers. That'll be part of the feedback process to staff from whoever is undertaking that work. And if council chooses to add a resolution, my only comment there would be to be very clear about what is defined, so that we know what it is you're seeking information. We will undertake that, and where we have causes or concerns raised, we will direct the staff there and start gathering data on those areas. Otherwise, they will be gathering data from any area they're visiting, whether it's for enforcement purposes or to monitor specific sites.
So just a final question, Your Worship, sorry. From that answer, is it the case that relatively remote areas like Seal Point Road will be on the regular monitoring route, or do we need to specifically add those in if we wish them to be monitored?
Those areas that are sensitive areas will be on the monitoring route, and obviously that will change depending on whether or not issues are found. We'll have to work with the resources we have, but certainly if there are issues, then they will remain on the regular monitoring route.
Any further questions? Okay, now we'll move into debate. It's been moved and seconded. Can I just, there's two things. I'm aware that you, Councillor Calvert was the seconder. That's right? I'm aware that you want to ask the mover and seconder if you can include another recommendation. Is that what I took from you?
Yeah, I would just like to ask one further question of staff, which would assist me in knowing whether or not that was essential. And that is, I guess my concern is not so much whether or not our numbers show up a concerning number of campers, but that we have a direct liaison with, say, DOC, for example, about the number, because it's not the numbers of campers which matters in those sensitive sites, it's the impact of those numbers on the wildlife. So I'd like to know that there was some calibration between, hey, we're seeing relatively large numbers down at Seal Point Road, is that of concern to you, DOC? Are you concerned about the numbers of people there in the mornings? Is that something that would be wrapped into this monitoring process or not?
With respect to that question, we work with DOC regularly anyway, so that is something that we can table with them, and the suggestion, which I think has come from Ruth, to report back at the end of summer on the performance of this bylaw, and in particular what the monitoring's found on those key sites, is something that we can do as well. Yeah.
Okay. So, going to the mover and seconder, can I just clarify your Councillor Calvert, you suggested the addition of effectively another recommendation, D, that the bylaw include a glossary of terms. Is that sufficient, or is that?
Yes. To make the bylaw self-explanatory.
Yeah, it's not a.
So,
can I just ask a question
sure.
of clarity around that? So page 15.9 has an interpretation section which gives a number of terms and explains them. Is that what the member is referring to in relation to a glossary?
So that's one of the reasons I was asking for clarification.
It was really either to expand that so as when it says camping ground has a meaning given under the Act, you actually give the meaning.
I understand what you're saying.
So it doesn't, it has some of the explanation, and I just, either by just adding those words, which I think is really a minor adjustment, or having a separate glossary for anything that isn't in there, but just so as that you can read that without having to go back to the Act.
Just think, if I could suggest, the term would be a self-contained glossary. That way, you don't have to refer to the Act to get the meaning. So that was,
I'm more than happy with your words, Your Worship.
Or even more generally, just that the bylaw will be self-explanatory.
Well, it's just for the purpose of discussion and voting, we need to know what the wording is. That's all. So the fourth recommendation is that the interpretation be self-explanatory. Okay. Right. So Councillor Vanderbush, you moved. Do you want to speak to it? No. further speakers to the Councillor Benson.
Sorry, I thought I was speaking before and I was asking the question. You're quite right, thank you very much. I repeat my thanks to all the people involved, but I wanted to make the point, now that I've got the ability to speak, to say that the punters who arrive aren't going to read the bylaw. The bylaw is a document for us, it is our record and it is our set of rules. The people are going to read what's on whatever app they use and whatever we can feed into that, and whatever leaflets we can put in their hot little hands, or whatever leaflets people leaving Tyro are given about what's acceptable. And so, of course, the definitions need to be clear. More importantly, what's acceptable behaviour needs to be articulated really simply in those documents.
Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think with this new bylaw we've landed in the right place. The question is whether the freedom campers coming in contained and self-contained and non-self-contained also land in the right place. But this is a huge big improvement on the previous one, which was essentially unenforceable. And it brings us up to speed with the likes of QLDC and Thames Coromandel, which are kind of places where they have more freedom campers arriving in their territories than we do. This thing will work. First of all, I'd just like to support Councillor Benson Pope and his thanks to the staff, because they have actually produced a bylaw in what I would thought was pretty quick time, so that we can get it implemented for this summer coming. The challenge will be through the communications, through getting the word out, and making sure people do understand where they can, where they cannot camp. So, as you all know, the peninsula is quite a major focus. We heard from Warrington and Ocean View submitters on those two sites too, and they were very welcoming and supportive of what we were doing. But the peninsula is certainly one which was problematic, and we've now removed that trial site at Candrew Bay. Just a couple of other things. Councillor Thompson, before he left me with this little challenge, because he thought the wording in Schedules B and C, so that's 1513 and 1514, was sort of confusing and a bit clumsy. I know that we've had our legal people looking at this, Richard, haven't we? And so I'm sort of reluctant to put this, but anyway, what Councillor Thompson was getting at, Your Worship, was to try to make it clearer and put some of the language into a positive frame instead of a kind of a double negative. So, for example, he had at Schedule B, 1513, Schedule B, so restricted areas for freedom camping for self-contained vehicles. And he says self-contained vehicles may camp at any area not specified in Schedule A, subject to the following conditions. And I can, it's something that you may see as an improvement. Schedule C, he wanted an improvement as well there. I'm not sure how we're going to deal with this, Your Worship.
Well, can I take it just from listening to what you're saying, that these are wording changes?
Yes, they are wording to clarify.
Clarifying wording changes. Yes. So what we could do is add another recommendation that proposed wording changes be...
Can I
yes,
say something? Is it?
Kicked off by someone, you or someone else.
Can I just... I think, just picking on Councillor Benson's point, this document is, I guess, our legal document, what allows us to undertake enforcement work. That type of messaging that I think, the positive messaging, which is what we want to get at, will appear on our collateral for campers. But for the purposes of this, which is effectively a regulatory document, I think what's in there is appropriate, and that's what we've had checked to this point. But certainly getting loud and clear from the table the type of messaging that you would like to see within the collateral and on the websites and the apps that the campers will be reading, because I would agree that there won't be too many Freedom campers tracking down and reading word for word the bylaw. So, yeah.
If I may continue then, yeah, I'm happy with that. My next question was, in fact, how public would this be, and how many Freedom campers would actually read the fine detail of it? Better for us to interpret it into positive language and welcoming and saying, here, these are the places that are available, rather than negative. So that's fine. I think Councillor Thompson would be happy with that. Just a couple of other comments. One, I was going to say that we do need to have a report at the end of the summer season about how this thing has gone, because it is a big challenge to enforce, a big challenge to communicate to the people, you know, coming here in the camper vans. They're all coming. They're coming to not to upset the environment or upset local communities. They're coming here to see things for themselves, and I think the bulk of them are going to try to comply with what we're enacting here this afternoon. And just finally, for those eagle-eyed wordsmiths, there's a couple of spelling errors. I've already communicated them to Richard. Purako Nui a couple of times, and Harrington Point Road are misspelled, and they'll be corrected. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I want to express a slight frustration that we're still working within a framework which we didn't get to choose, and that's the Freedom Camping Act, which itself is not perfect and has therefore given us some guidance of what we can do, but doesn't necessarily allow us to do everything we might want otherwise to do. So it's restrained. We're constrained somewhat from doing what I think may have given us a better result. But I have to say that I've always enjoyed the quality of the submissions that come up to these meetings, and we had a range of people who just didn't want to see Freedom campers at all again ever, to the people who took their kids out for a weekend to Murderers Bay or whatever with their car and put up a tent and they did it right. What I don't want to see is a whole lot of vigilantes hearing that we've banned from McAndrew Bay's any camping, and actually we haven't. What we have said that if you want to do that, you need to get a permit. And so I don't want people to think that they can be vigilantes, as has happened continuously from now on, that while staff are completely correct in answering your questions before Councillor Wiley, people can get a permit and go and do some of that stuff still, even in those areas. And that's really important to be clear about. One of the best submissions came from Geraldine Tate, who gave us a wonderful example of a camp mum up that area who had taken it on herself to be a welcoming and caring and instructive person in that in Warrington camping area. And that's actually what we need a lot more people to do. And I know that staff are happy to work with those sort of people and make people feel welcome, safe, but also make them very aware of what they shouldn't do and what their responsibilities are, because that's the only way this will work. I think that if we want to have this as a place that Kiwis go to, not just international people, we have to really think about how we make sure that that is done in a really friendly and welcoming way. I've just had a wonderful experience up in Whangarei where they have areas which they welcome in unused car parks that aren't used at night, welcome people to them on their website where they've got reserves. They say, yes, you can camp there, but for these reasons, we don't think you're going to be particularly safe, and they direct them to exactly where they think they'll be safe and have a much better experience and and that's the sort of stuff that doesn't come in a bylaw. It has to come at a later stage, and I have some hope and confidence that the staff are understanding that process and will make that happen. I have, and I'm glad that it's been suggested for the wordsmithing clause to be added, because I do have some concerns that page 15-16 is actually where it is, because while it, and I've got some concerns with the wording, but it actually isn't part of the bylaw, and I don't think it should come in the in where the maps are before the parts that are still part of the bylaw, and that's just a structure problem. I'm sorry, I don't think that I got a chance to peruse the decision before it came out, but on that basis, that there's some possibility to do some of those changes. I'm confident that we've got the best place we can at present under the current legislation, and look forward to hearing much better results at the end of this next season.
Councillor Noon.
Thank you, Worship. Just a bouquet really for the hearings panel and the staff. I think that instead of dealing with this issue on a citywide basis, it was very much dealt with on a North Coast, South Coast and Peninsula basis, and just really want to acknowledge, as Councillor Wilson's alluded to, Camp Mother Prue Casey of Warrington has been basically self-appointed, but she does a marvellous job, and I'm sure there are Prue Caseys all over the city, and I suppose just sets the city apart, where people take a pride in their own patch, and with regards to Warrington, the fact that you've divided up that reserve where the strengths and weaknesses have been sort of allocated to the different requirements of the campus. So, no, I appreciate what you've done. Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
It was interesting because I sat through 4 hours of the hearings, and there was a lot of great comments, and there was a lot of the naysayers, and there was a lot of people that came with some interesting ideas, and I applaud the three that sat on the hearings, and I also take what Councillor Wilson just said, you know, some of the different issues that came into play. The one part that I am going to be very thankful for is that there will be no essentially freedom camping at McAndrew Bay, and some of the other freedom camping issues on the peninsula have been solved. The frightening stat for me was in March 2014, the New Zealand Motor Caravan Association said there was roughly 35,000 domestic vehicles, and 80% of them, 28,000 are members. Then the rental market is estimated to be at 5,500 camper vans and motorhomes and growing. So that's just the rental market. In 2011, there were 64,000 camper van hires in New Zealand, 10,000 by residents, 54,000 by international visitors. Now, thinking back to July 2011, we had approximately 2.5 or just under 2.5 million visitors for the year previous to and up to. And in July of 2015, we had just over 3 million. So that was a 17% increase. So if we take that across and go, okay, there's 54,000 camper van hires back in 2011, we're now going to have in up to July 2015, 63,000 hires and growing. Now that's just international camper van hires plus another 10 or 11,000 domestic, and I actually think that's probably going at a faster rate as more international visitors choose the camper van experience versus the motels, hotel accommodation sector route. The part that we have to really look at is there's a huge difference between self-contained and non-self-contained, and a lot of the issues were caused by, or nearly all the issues were caused by non-self-contained. The work that the Motor Caravan Association are doing, and we're working with their members and improving areas for their membership, has got to be applauded as well, and I think we could go a little bit further there. The part I'm really struggling with is I don't believe we've gone far enough, and that is basically I do not support self-contained campers being able to stay overnight at our local parks such as the Kensington Oval or at our spectacular lookouts and some of our other favourite areas. Parks are parks, camping grounds are camping grounds. We need to do a little bit more in that area going forward, and we need to find them some better locations. And as Councillor Wilson said, there were some areas in different areas, just like in the States, supermarkets open up their car parks for overnight camping. They come in late and they leave early, things like that. But we also have to recognise the balance with our campgrounds and the employment and the issues they deal with. And they do have to charge, because actually they do have to take away the rubbish and service all these camper vans as well. So I struggle with that, and I will continue to struggle with that and go forward. The final point I want to make is that we also have to look after the camper vans that are going to be there during the day. It's great to have them staying in at Warrington, Middlemarch, down at Ocean View or wherever else. But another area we do need to tackle and look at quite clearly is where can these camper vans park during the day, and so the people coming to visit our city can actually enjoy it without having to basically walk for miles and leaving their vehicle somewhere on the outskirts.
Councillor McTavish.
Briefly, Your Worship, I just would draw the committee/staff's attention to the responses to submitters from Te Aroni. They may be worth just revisiting to ensure that the message that's going back to them is that they won't be facing freedom campers on, because whilst it may be intrinsic to what's been said, I don't think it's that clear. I guess I think I've already made my point in questions. I do have significant concerns that what we're doing with this policy is moving campers from one area in which they're causing issues for residents to an area in which they will cause issues for non-human residents, and that there is, and I'm not saying I've got the perfect solution. I sat on the first panel, and I know that it's a fraught issue and that it's very difficult, but I think that we do need to be keeping a very close watch on the ecological impacts of what we're doing. I know that historically hasn't been a strong focus for this council, and it would be, with our new environment strategy, I think front and centre in terms of the things that we would consider. And I think when we come back with that monitoring in 6 months' time or 8 months' time, we'll be in a much better position to evaluate the extent to which this is a case of out of sight, out of mind, or whether it's actually going to ensure that we don't have ecological impacts from an ecological side effect of the very positive activity which these people bring to our city.
Councillor, do you wish to exercise your right of reply?
Just briefly, Councillor Benson Pope has made the good point, and Mr Saunders, that people generally won't be reading this bylaw, but hopefully, especially being a self-explanatory bylaw, this bylaw will inform the related leaflets and publications that they will read. Congratulations on getting to a bylaw that, by and large, has settled pretty much comfortably with most groups concerned. So thank you very much for that.
I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. On to item 16, interim audit. Right, Grant, welcome. Anything you want to lead off with, Grant, or do you want to go straight to questions?
Oh, sorry. All right, so this is part of the annual audit process. The auditors do a two-stage management report to us, an interim one, which is the one you've got in front of you, and the final one, which will come back later in the year. The interim report tends to look at the internal controls of council and areas of focus that the Auditor General set out, so it's look like their preliminary work. Issues that get raised in this report then get monitored on a monthly basis or bi-monthly basis and go back to the Audit Risk Committee until issues have been resolved. So I'll take any questions if there are any.
Now, question, sorry, Councillor Adams.
On 16.8, it talks about capital programs and renewal backlogs, asset management in particular. We reported that our findings of relocation to asset management and our LTP consultation dated 9th of June. We encourage City Council to implement our recommendations made. What kind of progress has actually been made towards that particular asset management suggestion that's been made?
Well, we're only about 2 or 3 months on from when they originally made that recommendation, so there hasn't been a lot of progress made to date, effectively.
Okay, on page 1612, talks about key management's personnel's related party interests. When directors of our companies have related parties and conflicts of interest, it's all made public. Is it intended that these are going to be public as well, as it is for directors?
So for the Audit and Risk Committee, they currently have a conflict of interest register that's presented in each meeting. The expectation is that that would flow out across the organisation.
And be public?
And public, yes.
Right, okay. Yes, on page 1611, contract management and procurement, my old favourite bugbear, it says here that a draft procurement policy has been developed and is currently being circulated to relevant members of the City Council. I've seen it in grey papers in the Sustainability Audit Committee. Is that who the relevant members of the City Council are?
So that policy has gone to the Audit and Risk Subcommittee as well as the committee that you referred to.
Audit Subcommittee?
Yeah, it's been to that as well, and my understanding is there's an expectation there will be a councillor workshop on the policy.
And then it will come to council for a decision.
So when it says here that it's circulated to relevant members, who are the relevant members?
So members of where, sorry?
It says on 1611, a draft procurement policy has been developed and is currently being circulated to relevant members of the City Council. It seems to me that these are the relevant members of the
No. So initially when that was written, that was referring to staff within council who were assisting with the development of the policy. So then it's going through the approval process, which is going to the Audit and Risk Subcommittee, the Sustainability Committee, I'll get the name wrong, and then obviously finally to council.
So it goes Audit and Risk, Sustainability, and then to councillors. Is that what's proposed?
Correct.
Bearing in mind that the papers for Audit and Risk and Sustainability Audit do come to all councillors. So they've had their thoughts, then the plan was to have a workshop with the chairs of each of those subcommittees present and all councillors so that you can discuss issues that you are and are not happy with or changes that you might like to see before we bring the final version here for debate, change, discussion.
And when is that proposed to be? When?
Well, so the papers have just been through Audit and Risk and Sustainability Audit in the last couple of weeks, so the discussion is to get the workshop pulled together as quickly as we can, and then the paper will then come to the next council meeting.
Thank you.
Further questions? Councillor, you'll move. Councillor Benson-Pope, seconded Councillor Noon. Discussion. Councillor Wilson, did you want to...
I was going to ask one question apropos of the first question from... I was going to ask a question, sorry, that's why. So, yeah, sorry, Councillor Vandervis just asked about how much work had been done to date, but on the capital, on the, I can't remember what the use now, asset management. Am I correct in believing, or maybe not, that is part of the work program for the Audit and Risk Committee and has been given some priority?
Whoops. Whenever the Audit and Risk Committee gets a report like these reports and it has a recommendation, basically the report then becomes part of their normal work program and there's a follow-up from it. So the when, where and who is going to be done it by, who's going to complete the work. So.
Great, and I have some confidence in that. The only question then is, and it's one that's been raised before recently, is there sufficient resourcing going in to allow the works program to meet the expectations of both Audit New Zealand and good governance?
There's a lot of work going on at the moment, following up a number of these reports that have been around for a number of years. Whether there's additional, we could always do with additional resource, but whether it's going to be cost effective, we'll be reporting back in due course after the last Finance Committee meeting where there was a resolution for us to do so.
Councillor, now we're into... Did you have a question or... Still a question. Fine.
On page 1614, where it talks about the expenditure manager, is the expenditure manager the CFO? Is it you, or is it some other position?
That's another position. I've got enough titles, I don't need that one as well.
I was going to say you're collecting quite a few.
I'm quite willing to give some away.
Is it a new position or is it a position we already have?
That position's been existing for a number of years.
And who is the current expenditure manager?
Graham Suter.
Ah, that one. Okay, I've had that under a different name before.
So his title's expenditure manager / procurement manager.
Right, it's the second name that I've known him by. So that's Mr. Suter. Now, a wee bit further down in the management comment, it says to get around the problem of higher risk of error, fraud or manipulation, it says here that the report review is performed by another staff member. Who would that another staff member be, and is it a position that is always going to be the case?
So normally it's it's done by one up, so it's be his manager, which is currently the financial controller.
Who is?
Gavin Logie.
Oh, Mr. Logie.
Yes.
Okay, so it's always going to be the one up?
Generally, there might be exceptions to that depending on what resources are available at the time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Do you have another question?
A question for the CEO. Is it possible that when Councillor Vandervis adds up all the job descriptions and the titles that he's getting the incorrect number of employees in the council because we have so many that have shared positions?
Moving right along. Right, we're into, it's been moved and seconded. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to the resolution? I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 17, carry forward budget. I imagine we'll start here, right?
Yes. Sorry, you have to put up me for another 5 minutes, hopefully. So carry forwards, this is a process that we use basically to ensure that we've got funding available mainly for capital projects. We try and limit the amount of operating funding that's available to carry it forward. The process tries to encourage good financial management by making sure that appropriate expenditure is carried forward to the future financial year, so you don't have that last minute spend that you used to get in the last month of the year as people try and use up all their budgets. So it's trying to make and promote good fiscal prudency.
Questions? Councillor McTavish.
Move, Your Worship.
Sorry?
Happy to move.
Second question.
It's moved Councillor McTavish, seconded Councillor Wilson. Did you have a question?
This, in the previous year, I think that there was carry forward for the Tunnels Trust, and I can't see it listed in here, but I presume it has still been carried forward.
Correct. There's some quite small carry forwards that we've just allowed as basically overspends in the current year. So a number of those come out of the annual plan process as well.
Councillor Vandervis.
You've just referred to a rather ancient culture whereby departments used to try and use up their budgets to make sure that they kept an equally fat budget in the following year. And I had hoped that we had got a bit beyond that now. My worry is that with carry forwards, we've got a situation where departments are keeping their jam jars or reserves rather than actually needing them. So I'm wondering where we are in terms of culture. Are we still at the point where some departments are trying to use up their existing budgets to keep them, or are we at a point where we've got departments trying to keep their budgets so that they've got some fat to play with in the next time, or have we got beyond it where we need to go, where there is real value in having these carry forwards and all of them, all 19 million, whatever it is? It's a bit of a vague cultural question, I grant, but if you'll excuse the pun, but there are sort of three stages getting to the real value consideration. One of them is the value just for our department and making sure we've got plenty for next year. The other one is we want to carry things forward because we haven't quite organised it this time. And the other one is that we really need these carry forwards because this work is necessary and it has real value. And I'm hoping that it's the third situation that we're rapidly evolving to.
So if you look at the table on 17.1, it clearly shows that the carry forwards, the vast majority of them for capital projects, $13 million overall. And you'll see that between the 2 years that's dropped from the 19.2 last year down to 13.8 in the current financial year, or the last financial year. There's been a lot of work going on to making sure that we are delivering for projects and that they are genuine carry forwards. They're not just there so that people can carry them forward because they haven't quite got round to it yet. So it is, I think we're moving closer towards number 3. I don't think we're quite there yet.
Right, I'm very pleased to see that it is becoming more project focused. My question really was coming to these particular projects. Are they really projects that we must do, given the debt situation? Do they have real value, or are they nice to have, like, you know, flyovers and cycleways?
Can I just point out that the projects must have gone through the annual planned budget, which we tick off. So asking whether they're nice to haves is asking whether council has put in things that were necessary. So it's kind of a
I take your point. My point was that if they were necessary, but they haven't happened for whatever reason, then perhaps they weren't quite as necessary.
No, the reasons are articulated was why they didn't happen. It might be weather reasons or might be resource reasons, but that doesn't. The point I'm making is that the decision about whether they're necessary or not is made by this council and the annual plan budget. That's the point. Is there any further questions? Councillor Fee.
Yeah, just for the record, and a specific question about Te Rawane breakwater. For I think at least 2, maybe 3 years, we've carried forward a $50,000 contribution to that project, which hasn't kicked off yet. But I'm just wondering, I think it might have a different title.
Yeah, it has been carried forward. Effectively, there's an approval for that, funding that $50,000.
Thank you.
Councillor Calvert.
How much of it, and I presume it's a lot less than it used to be, is carry forwards that were carried forward on a previous year?
I can't tell you off the top of my head, sorry. There will be some, particularly around the Ocean Beach domain. There has been carry forwards over a number of years, but that is mainly for good reasons why that has occurred. But I can't give the total off the top of my head, I don't know. But I can get that information.
If you could just, when you find it,
email it to all councillors.
Yeah, that'd be lovely.
Jeff, do you want to?
Just with regards to your question, Councillor Vandervis, it may councils and government departments have long had a culture where if you rush and use up all your budget at the end of the year, it makes it much easier for you to get a budget of the same size. One of the things that's been happening here over the last 4 years is that if you apply for a carry forward, it's far more likely we'll actually dock it off your next year's budget. And so for staff coming, that creates a tension for them to feel inaccurately weigh up the need. And I think you've seen not only our processes getting better so that the things are getting done in a timely fashion, if there is carry forwards, staff are much more likely to think, okay, those carry forwards affect my chances of delivering my full, particularly renewals budget for next year, and so I need to, right at the beginning, in fact well before the beginning of the year, start to take that into account when I plan my next year's budget. So that pushback, and that's become quite a good two-way backwards and forwards process for staff to really interrogate with their own managers and staff, are we actually going to deliver this, rather than just keeping their fingers crossed. And I think all of our managers are responding quite well to that.
Great, that was actually what I really hoped to hear. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Hall.
In the carry forward on capital, I see we carry on transportation, footpath resurfacing, carrying forward 350,000 on that contract. Did we end up losing money out of that on this liquidation, or?
Sorry, I couldn't comment.
No, I can confirm that we didn't, but we're still working through with the liquidators the final terms of that contract. And at the moment we need to have that budget available whilst we finalise those negotiations.
No further questions. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 18. Just to let, just to let everyone know that we've ordered just a bit of a snack for 6 o'clock, but I would hope that we won't take very long eating that. It will be 2 hours by the time we get to then, and I think we should take a break, but then it'll be a short one. So we're on to notification of the Senior Generation District Plan. Welcome, Adam. Welcome, Nicola. Councillor Hall's sitting back and noted that. Thank you. Christy, did you wish to just make some comments in terms of legal risk, etc., conflicts?
Councillors, I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that this report item is seeking to publicly notify the 2GP in the form that's been proposed. If it was intended that yourself or an entity that you were associated with was to make a submission on the 2GP, I would be advising you to think very carefully about whether you participate in the decision to notify the plan in this form, and just encourage you to refer to the legal advice from Anderson Lloyd, where they've also given that strong advice. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. So, Councillor Campbell, are you sitting back? You've got that? Thank you. Okay. Do you wish to talk, Anna, or do you want to just abstract questions? Or? Questions, Councillor.
I've had a few complaints from people that say that it's just far too many pages and that certain things in it just rile them so much they can't even look at it. Now, without getting into any detail, is it possible to get a really concise bullet point summary so that the real changes or the real meaty bits could be much more accessible?
We will have information on the website. So if, it's already there. It's not open externally yet, but if you go on the computers in the council lounge, you can see the information that's on the website. We have tried to, I called it the Cliff Notes version of the district plan. We did try to go through every section and in 2 to 6 pages summarize the key things that people might want to be aware of, and also have enough information that if they really can't handle getting into the 2GP, that they could make a submission based only on that information. So that was the intent. The other main way of trying to help people, because it is a difficult document, we absolutely acknowledge that, is we have set up a drop-in center at the bottom of the escalators on George Street. And we are quite happy to help people with their submissions and walk them through the process, and we'll have plenty of staff available to do that. So those have been our 2 main strategies in terms of making the plan more accessible for people.
So is there no possibility of perhaps a 1 or 2 page summary that you could use to simply, like if people say, what's in this 2GP? I haven't got time to read 500 pages, and I get this quite a bit. Whatever. Is it possible for you to provide just a very short summary where I can say, look, this is what's proposed. If you want to get it, if any of this worries you, there's lots of detail that lies behind it. I agree it's a difficult thing that you're doing, and you've got all my sympathy trying to do it. But in terms of what's difficult for me as an elected representative, I can't explain or give people anything for them to hang their hat on as regards what it's about. In very general terms, in a one-pager, is it possible to get that kind of summary, or is that just asking too much?
I think on the web information, it does, the only thing that's really a one-pager is what is a district plan and what does it manage and what's its purpose. That's pretty much all you can, if you only have one page that you could cover. Once once you get into the different zones and what are the key issues, you do really need to get to 2 to 6 pages. We have come up with sort of a top 10 list of sort of statements that we will be including in the 2GP public notice, and they're more tasters to get people's interest, and we have really tried to highlight things that we think people are interested in or should take note of, you know, in terms of significant changes.
Okay, so when will that be available?
That will all be available on Saturday. So everything is in production at the moment and will go live on Saturday.
Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Bishop. Just a question of concern, I suppose. If my colleagues are receiving negative feedback on the 2GP already before it's been notified, is that something that we should be concerned about? Is there any way that people should be, or maybe it's a question for Councillor Vandevers, are you referring not to the second generation district plan, but to material that's previously been published in the consultation phase around this?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I just have people making complaints about a plan that isn't out yet already on the basis that they understand some of what's in it. Now, and I'm not talking about people that have, you know, connections to council. I'm talking about man on the street type people. The last one was an employee of Everett Enterprises, a farmer. So what they're certainly worried about changes in the plan. And what I would love to be able to give them is a summary saying, look, these are the sorts of things that are changed in the second generation thing. Maybe it's just paranoia about something new, but there's certainly a fair bit of it out there from my feedback.
Councillor Noon.
Happy to move A to F when you're ready, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions, Councillor? Secondly. Okay. Well, if there are no further questions, we'll go on to, it's been moved and seconded. They're the recommendations on page 18.1, A to F. Is there any discussion?
Just briefly, Your Worship, obviously this is a statutory process that we're heading down the path of. It will be a mammoth task, and I just need to acknowledge the work that staff have already done up until, or completed up until this point. There's been a considerable amount of consultation with stakeholders, the industry, whether it's surveyors, planners, all sorts, to try and, I suppose, massage the 2GP to this point. Picking up on Councillor Vandevers' points, there is always going to be talk about planning issues and questions posed to elected members about whether it's the existing plan or what's going to be notified, and we clearly haven't the opportunity until the 26th to really share the conversation or direct them to the drop centre or the website or whatever. So I suppose the key thing now is to ensure that when we get that that concern raised with us, we direct them to staff, we encourage them to submit. This process is as I said, it's a relatively long process, so not only they can submit once, they have an opportunity, they've submitted, once that sort of second step occurs where staff have summarised those original submissions, then they get an opportunity to submit on that staff summary. And picking up also on Councillor Vandevers' point is that it is a huge, it covers a huge amount of topics, and there aren't probably many ratepayers and householders that won't have an interest in this document. And I don't think I'm exaggerating saying that, but it does influence most people out there in the community in some shape or form. So I suppose the key theme really would be to encourage members of our community to submit and involve themselves in the process, and we look forward to hearing from them.
Councillor Wilson.
I just want to also thank the staff. I mean, I think it's a really exciting time to see a second generation plan that's had the thought going in behind it, with not only the spatial plan, but also planning for an E-plan. That's a huge, substantial change. I recall, unlike probably many people around the table, although some of you were here, the rollout of the previous district plan, and it was a fraught process where it was a race to be the first one out in New Zealand under the new mayor. Probably not the best methodology or reason to get the district plan out, and it was fraught, and it didn't take the community with it. I think the work that the staff have done in engaging with people, trying to get them on board, trying to get the best debate and discussion has been absolutely fabulous. It doesn't mean that we won't get submissions, it doesn't mean that we won't make people upset or angry, but it does mean that there's been a really good thinking that's gone in behind it, and then to convey that by way of an electronic plan, and to do it with the layers that are going to make the whole document, I hope, a lot easier to read and much more clarity to it. I'd like to really commend the staff, all of them, because there are many of them, and it's much further, and some are no longer with the department, regrettably, but it's been a fabulous effort, so well done.
Further speakers? Councillor.
Just to reiterate the thanks to staff, I think the spatial plan kicked off even before I was on council, so that's a wee while now. It's over 5 years, it's half a decade. So it's been an extensive period of work, and Anna, I think that you have commendably guided the changing team through that process, so thank you for that. I acknowledge also that that has been done on a constrained budget and with constrained resource, and I think the quality of the work that sits in behind that has been really significant given in the context of those constraints. I also would like to reiterate the point that Councillor Noon has made. You know, the previous plan, I think, was first notified in 96, is that right? 95, yeah. So it's quite some time ago now, and the impact of this plan, whilst we would hope that it was reviewed a bit earlier than the last one, the impact of this plan, once it is adopted, will be significant and temporarily significant in the sense that probably not just the next decade, not just the next 2 decades, but probably the next 3 decades of the city will be shaped by this plan. And so participation from residents is absolutely critical in ensuring that we get it right, and I guess the discussion on how we might encourage that sits really with the next paper, but I hope that people will take the interest that this plan deserves and that the work that staff have put into it encourages.
Well, I'd like to commend staff for the work they've done. I'd also like to commend the fact that, going back quite a long way, it was decided that this second generation district plan would be built on a platform of the spatial plan, and I think that was a very good decision at the time, because at the time, as I understand it, there was no requirement for any council other than the newly amalgamated Auckland Council to have anything like a spatial plan. There was far-sighted, I think, of this council to just decide to start with that, and that has given, I think, this draft GP much more robustness and much more acceptability within the community. As Councillor Wilson said, there will be submissions and there will be changes because we still want to keep hearing from the community that will be affected by it. But the fact is that the spatial plan set a very good foundation and got a lot of input from the community to inform the development of this plan, and I think that was very positive and well worthwhile. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Noon, do you want to exercise your right of reply?
Just picking up on the theme in my right of reply with regards to the spatial plan, and that was remiss of me not to mention that, but I suppose as we move towards a second generation plan, this is the weaving in of the spatial plan theme, and it's sort of where the rubber hits the road in terms of the influence, because decision makers up until now, since the spatial plan has been adopted through the resource consent process, we can't give it very little weight. But once it is interwoven into the 2GP, that will essentially allow us to give it far greater weight going forward. And I suppose the other thing to note in the recommendations is that essentially by moving what we're about to move from A to F, we're acknowledging that the section 32 analysis, where we've gone through the pros and cons and the proposed changes in the second generation plan, we're accepting they've been well researched, well written, and meet the intent of the Act. And I think that's another important aspect. And finally, those under D, under recommendation D, there is the two rules that essentially come into effect the day of notification, and that's the rural subdivision one, and also the Indigenous vegetation clearance rule, where we felt a need, and that was in discussion with the TAG group, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Benson Pope and senior planning staff. We felt that it was important to have that those two rules to kick in on day one, because of the potential negative effects that could be created by an avalanche of applications in both those areas, which that could create some real issues from a planning point of view going forward. So please support it.
Thank you. Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. I'll now move from the chair that we take a break of quarter of an hour. Secondly, Councillor Hawkins. Well, we'll take a quarter of an hour. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. So, right, we're on to excuse me, item 9.10, appointment of the Hearings Committee for the 2GP District Plan.
I'll move on, Your Worship. Maybe Anna wants to come.
Have you given...
yes, sir.
Yes.
So number 19? Yes. So, Kate, is there anything else in there?
So if you want to move it up.
It comes after.
Yeah, but we agree to do that, but we don't actually name that.
No, I don't. We do that until we know who your person is.
Okay. The proposed resolution is on the board.
Completely out.
I will second that. So it's moved, Councillor Noon, seconded myself.
Sorry, a slight amendment. It was remiss of me not to exclude D. D essentially says an independent member of the panel as the chairperson of the panel. So essentially, until we are able to identify as a name who is available, who will be those independent people, I don't think it is appropriate that we actually.
Okay. Understandably. So we will
delete D.
Cross D out. So this effectively, so A is the one at the top and on bold. Okay. Do you wish to speak to that in the first instance?
Just very briefly, with regards to the hearings panel, Councillor.
Sorry?
Can we see the motion?
Yeah, that's it.
So the rest of it is just as per the order paper with the exception of D.
Yes, so just to be clear, A is more fully there. The rest are the same as on the order paper except for the deletion of D.
Thank you. Sorry.
Councillor Noon.
Thank you, Worship. With regards to recommendation C, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Benson Pope, Councillor McTavish and Councillor Hawkins have all completed their RMA certification, and Councillors Wilson, Benson Pope and Hawkins have all completed their chair certification. Oh, sorry, McTavish. Sorry. So the three of them have also completed their chair certification, and also we've got former Crown Minister or Minister of Environment as part of that team as well. So I think we're well resourced in that regard, and we look forward to identifying some independent members at a later date.
Okay. And I take it that there will be a requirement of any independent members that they will also be suitably qualified.
Yes.
Okay, speakers. Councillor Benson Pope.
Just a question, if I might, in terms of the identity of the others. Am I correct in assuming that the independents are not to be appointed until so? I just want some clarity on the process, because clearly, if there was any suggestion here that we didn't have a say about who those people were going to be, I had some reservations.
I suppose it's a timing issue, and whether that a report can come back to council to identify the three independent commissioners to be part of the team. So then it's a council decision finally.
That's fine.
Obviously, staff, if we perhaps request a report that staff prepare and bring back to council at a later date, because the timing issue probably, we've got a little bit of time up our sleeve. So if that was to occur, I imagine that we will still have those members in train before the work really kicked in.
Would it be appropriate to include in the recommendations that what you've just said, that the appointment of the independents would be brought, the appointment process of the independents would be brought to council?
E. E.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, very good.
Sorry, I'm not trying to be difficult, it's just that
No.
I know the driver for considering people from outside for all sorts of reasons, but that will also depend on who they are.
Yeah, but E, you're happy with it, E takes care of it. Okay. Councillor, well, sorry, Councillor.
Comment on also the advantage of appointing those 3 additional independent commissioners at a little bit later is that you'll have your 40 days or thereabouts. We'll have submissions coming in, and there will be a feel for the flavour of those submissions, so we can perhaps identify commissioners that have certain skill set that will meet the sort of demand from the submission process, so that will be beneficial.
Councillor Wilson.
2 matters. On page 19.7, I think it just requires, considering the discussion that's already happened, the words independent commissioner for the moment to be taken off the chairperson's role, and the insert of the word up to 7 hearings commissioners, which makes sense in light of the rest of the recommendations. While we're talking about 3, it may not be 3 that are needed, or we may not be able to find 3. And on 19.8, only because we're confirming in one of these motions, this document, the word on the second last line, to, needs to be added after the word apply. That's one matter. That's just for clarity. Now, the other issue, and it's a question, yeah, the word T0, sorry, after the word apply in the second last sentence.
This is
Second last line, I mean, for the avoidance of doubt, standing orders do not apply to proceedings.
19.8, on the last thing, explanatory notes, C, for the avoidance of doubt, standing orders do not apply to proceedings.
And the other one was the words independent commissioner after chairperson on the first page, to be confirmed.
So and what page was that, Councillor?
19.7. After chairperson to be confirmed, just delete independent chairperson, commissioner at the moment. And I think the words up to 7 hearings. Yep, thank you. Okay, the other issue in this question really is, and it's only just come to me right now, and apologies for not following this up at an earlier date, but it may be an issue that can be followed up later, and it's partly from a question of Councillor Lord. There are very ambitious timeframes here, given how long the previous district plan hearings took. And I'm just wondering at what point, and whether it's better to do it advantageously now rather than the end of the triennium, we actually make these appointments for a longer term and for the duration of the hearings. And that takes out that whole... I don't think it is in there. Sorry, was it? I missed that.
That's certainly been raised
I didn't...
in my hearing before.
Apologies, I didn't see that.
It's on page 19.8 in the paragraph number 10.
Yes.
And it's simply been left open-ended.
Sorry, I would have thought that that actually had to happen on the recommendations today. But that's fine if you're doing it that way. Okay.
Well, assuming what we passed today includes the terms of reference, then I think that's taken care of.
Okay, sorry.
Councillor Manders.
Sorry, I've had my question answered.
So we're actually, I'm happy to take more questions, but we're actually in debate. So is there any further speakers that wish to speak to this? Okay, Councillor Noon. So I'll put it, all those in favour please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Meeting schedule for, item 20, meeting schedule for 2016. Sandy's not here to discuss this, but effectively there have been 2 options given, and there isn't a recommendation, so it's really Up to Councillor Landers.
I'd just like to move that we go for option 2, which is the 6 weekly cycle. And the reason for that being that a lot of the meetings that we have had in the past haven't been that long. This is an obvious exception to them. 6 weeks to me seems to be the amount of time where enough things gather to actually make it worthwhile. We don't want to come along to meetings that are only half an hour long. And the 6 week cycle, I think, has a precedent as well. So
okay.
That's why
is there a seconder for that, please? Councillor Wilson? Okay. Would speakers? Councillor McTavish?
I won't take up everyone's time, but this isn't my preference. I would prefer the alternative. I think the 6 weekly cycle is proven fraught for a range of reasons, and I won't bore everyone by going into those because I have previously canvassed them with people that matter, and that's why we have options in front of us today. So I find it difficult, and I won't be supporting this. Prefer to revert to a more regular meeting schedule for committees.
Basically, we've got a choice here. So, Councillor McTavish, you said that you didn't want to go into all the reasons, but it might be, given that we've got to decide this on the basis of. Well, I think, I mean, it's the effects. I mean, Councillor Vandervis has quite rightly pointed out some issues that need to be taken into account in determining that, but you clearly have an alternative view, and I think for the sake of us making the decision here, it'd be good for you to explain what the difficulties you see with 6 weekly cycle.
Yeah, well, it could be that it's just me that finds it, but as a committee chair, I find it difficult to have a number of reports that would normally come to the committee that I chair directly to council. It means that I'm not chairing the meeting that they come to. It means I don't necessarily, or haven't recently been seeing them in advance. And I think there is a reason why we have a committee system whereby chairs who perhaps have been involved in or have been involved in issues and understand them comprehensively chairing that meeting. It's not to take anything away from the Mayor, I think he does a great job, but it's just, I think that's why the committee system was set up the way it was, and I find that it's not operating, for me anyway, as effectively as it could be, or I don't feel that I'm as effective as a chair as I could be if I was more involved in some of the reports that are coming through and had the opportunity to chair the meetings at which they were brought. I also, as an example, I think our last committee meeting for C&E was in August, maybe even earlier. I think it was early August. The one after that was mid-October, and then there was nothing until the annual plan meeting in January. What that means is that any reports for C&E that, by virtue of their timing, don't make it to the C&E meeting in October, there's a pretty massive gap, and then everything gets dumped into annual plan discussions in January. And I find that really fraught because we end up making a whole raft of decisions which are unrelated to annual plan matters, tiring us out in January, and I think that's unhelpful, and I don't think it's a good decision-making process. So I prefer to see more regular committees during the year, which gives the more opportunity for reports to be coming through in a more staggered way, means that committee chairs get to chair the relevant reports that come through under those committees rather than going direct to council. Sorry, that's a very long-winded way of explaining my concerns, but those are my concerns.
It's not often that I can agree with totally contrary views, but the reason I do agree with Lee Vandervis is because I think the second option actually provides exactly what you just asked for, because it provides you with 6 meetings a year rather than 4 on schedule option 1. So I'm not sure who's reading what, but my understanding of option 2 is that there are 6 meetings of community and environment in that plan, and only 4 under the option 1 that you just suggested you wanted.
Sorry.
But I'm not sure that I'm reading the right document, so I agree with the reasoning, but not quite the outcome that Councillor The option one doesn't have every time a meeting of every committee. That's the difference. But every committee does meet in the 2 monthly, on the 6 weekly round. It's not particularly easily followable. It's not particularly easy to follow, I have to say.
Well, can I contribute to that part of it? Given that that's the case, I can support this resolution because I think Councillor Vandervis. Yeah,
I apologise, I misinterpreted.
I think Councillor Vandervis's point about short meetings is fair enough, but I think that where we tend to find long meetings is with council. So the more standing committee meetings you can have, you get to things in a more timely manner. I think they're discussed at an early stage, which gives the opportunity to revisit them in council rather than coming to council and having to solve every problem at once. So having more regular standing committee meetings, I think, is beneficial. So if that's the outcome of the 6 weekly cycle, then I'll support this.
Sorry, my fault.
That's right.
Time for 5 minutes, but I thought it was 6 weekly.
Still going.
Are there any other speakers? No other speakers? Right. Okay, I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. So that's option 2.
The old system.
No, so now we're on to meeting, that's the meeting schedule. So the next one's been dropped. So I will move from the chair that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting, namely items 22 to 25. Seconded Councillor Lord. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried.